It's a realm shrouded in mystery and, unfortunately, sometimes in darkness of a far more sinister kind. Tonight we delve into that darkness. What you are about to see are not fictional tales spun for entertainment. These are accounts, sometimes fragmented, sometimes chillingly detailed, of true crimes that have been linked to the dark web. These stories can be disturbing, even unsettling. They offer a glimpse into the potential dangers that lurk within this shadowy part of the internet. So take a deep breath and prepare yourself. What you are about to witness are true dark web crime scary stories. Viewer discretion is advised. Alright, let's get this down while I still feel anchored. Noah Peterson reporting for duty. Though honestly, duty feels like a cosmic joke right now. My world revolves around pixels and processing power, crafting realities that exist only behind a lens. I work in VR development, specifically environmental design and sensory feedback integration. Think haptic suits, olfactory simulators, the whole 9 yards. We're chasing the dragon of total immersion, trying to blur the line between the digital and the real until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It's cutting-edge stuff, or at least that's what the glossy brochures claim. Privately, among the code monkeys and hardware gurus I call colleagues, we know we're still just scratching the surface. True seamless integration. That's the holy grail, always just out of reach. My obsession with immersion doesn't stop when I clock out. If anything, it intensifies. I spend hours trawling the web, not just the surface stuff, but the deeper, murkier corners. Obscure tech forums, private beta testing groups, encrypted chat rooms where whispers of bleeding edge, often ethically dubious advancements are exchanged. I'm always looking for the next thing. The breakthrough someone's having in a garage, or a clandestine lab that makes our corporate R&D look like toddlers finger painting. It was during one of these late-night digital spelunking sessions, deep in a forum dedicated to experimental biohacking and fringe neurotechnology, that I first stumbled upon the rumors. They weren't loud or flashy, more like digital breadcrumbs scattered across heavily encrypted threads. Whispers about experiential rentals available only through specific, hard-to-find marketplaces on the dark web. Not VR. Not traditional AR overlays projected onto glasses or screens, but something else. The descriptions were maddeningly vague, using terms like reality augmentation, neuro-linked environments, and sensory weaving. The most persistent and chilling term was fully immersive sensory experience. It sounded like marketing bullshit, the kind I write myself sometimes, but the context, the dark web, the extreme secrecy, the warnings about psychological side effects gave it a sinister edge. Naturally, I was hooked. This wasn't just the next step, it sounded like a quantum leap. Forget headsets and gloves. This hinted at technology that interfaced directly with perception. Was it advanced psychoacoustics? Direct neural stimulation? Some kind of localized reality field manipulation I couldn't even begin to conceptualize. My rational mind screamed scam or dangerous delusion, but the obsessive tech chaser in me, the part that needed to know, drowned it out. Finding the actual marketplace was an ordeal. It required multiple layers of TOR, specific PGP keys exchanged through dead drop email accounts, and navigating interfaces that looked like they were designed in the dial-up era, deliberately obtuse and unwelcoming. It felt less like online shopping and more like digital espionage. After weeks of cautious probing, I finally found it a stark, minimalist site listing only a handful of experiences. No pictures, just cryptic titles and brief, often grammatically questionable, descriptions. One listing caught my eye: Unit 7B, the Perceptual Echo Chamber. The description read, a unique residential opportunity offering unparalleled sensory immersion. Experience reality filtered, enhanced, and reconstructed. Short-term leases available for discerning individuals seeking profound environmental integration. Full-spectrum augmentation. Discretion assured. Liability waived. Below it, a single, unverifiable review simply said, saw things I shouldn't have, still see them sometimes. 5 stars, chilling, yet utterly irresistible. The booking process was predictably shady. Communication happened via encrypted, self-destructing messages. Payment was strictly in Monero, a notoriously untraceable cryptocurrency, transferred through a series of mixing services. The landlord, who communicated only through text using what seemed like a voice modulator filter even in written form, if that makes sense, the syntax was just off. provided minimal details. I received GPS coordinates to a location about 3 hours out of the city, a key code for a lockbox, and a strict warning: no outside recording devices. No external communication during occupancy. What happens in Unit 7B stays in Unit 7B. Attempting to analyze or reverse engineer the augmentation technology as grounds for immediate termination of the lease and forfeiture of deposit, and potentially other consequences. Ominous, much part of me knew this was insane. Handing over a significant chunk of crypto to an anonymous entity on the dark web for a vaguely described experience in some unknown location. Red flags weren't just raised, they were performing a synchronized swimming routine. But the lure of experiencing something genuinely new, something that might redefine immersion as I understood it, was too strong. I rationalized it. I'm a VR developer. This is field research. Extreme field research maybe, but potentially revolutionary. The drive out was tense. I left my work laptop and personal phone behind, taking only a burner phone which I was instructed to turn off upon arrival, some clothes, and basic supplies. The GPS coordinates led me off the main highway, onto winding country roads, and finally down a poorly maintained gravel track ending in a small, surprisingly mundane-looking cluster of detached bungalow-style buildings. They looked like repurposed motel units or maybe short-term worker housing, strangely isolated amidst overgrown fields and skeletal trees. There was no sign, no reception, nothing to indicate what this place was. My Unit 7B was at the far end, slightly more isolated than the others. The air was still, unnervingly quiet except for the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant call of a crow. Using the code, I opened the lockbox attached to the weathered doorframe. Inside lay a single, old-fashioned brass key. The lock clicked open smoothly. Stepping inside, the first thing that struck me was the overwhelming normality. It was aggressively bland. Beige walls, cheap laminate flooring. Functional but utterly unremarkable furniture: a small sofa, a coffee table, a kitchenette unit, a closed door presumably leading to a bedroom and bathroom. It smelled faintly of stale air and cleaning products. There were no visible wires, no projectors, no emitters, no strange devices anywhere. If this was an augmented reality space, the tech was completely invisible, seamlessly integrated, or not here at all. I dropped my bag, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet room. My developer brain immediately started scanning, analyzing. Where was the power source for this supposed tech? How was it projecting or influencing? Was it embedded in the walls? Subtle atmospheric manipulation. Infrasound. I ran my hands along the walls, tapped on surfaces, checked power outlets. Nothing, just a standard, slightly depressing rental unit. A wave of disappointment washed over me, quickly followed by a prickle of unease. Had I just been scammed? Driven 3 hours and dropped a load of crypto for a crappy room in the middle of nowhere? Or was the experience simply not active yet? I checked the sparse instructions again. No mention of an activation process. It was supposed to be inherent to the environment. I walked over to the window, pulling aside the cheap plastic blinds. Outside, the view was just as uninspiring: tangled weeds, the grayish-brown wall of the next unit, a sliver of overcast sky. As I stared, a flicker. Just a momentary jitter in the landscape, like a single frame dropped from a video feed. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Must be tired from the drive, I thought. Stress, anticipation. Happens all the time when you stare too long. I turned away from the window, heading towards the kitchenette to get some water. Out of the corner of my eye, in the reflection on the blank TV screen mounted on the wall, I thought I saw the blinds twitch again. But when I spun back around, the window was still, the view unchanged. Just the wind, I told myself, even though the air outside seemed perfectly calm. Just nerves. It had to be. But a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. This place felt off in a way simple disappointment couldn't explain. The quiet was too deep, the stillness too absolute. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. And I had the sickening feeling I was waiting with it. The glitching, I suspect, was just beginning. Dismissing the initial flickers as nerves felt good for about 5 minutes. Long enough to pour a glass of water from the tap, water that tasted faintly metallic. Almost like licking a battery, and take a hesitant sip. Long enough to force myself to sit on the uncomfortable sofa and try to think rationally. This had to be tech. Maybe some kind of advanced projection system I couldn't see. Or perhaps it wasn't visual at all, but targeted neural interference. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to pin the weirdness down with the familiar logic of code and hardware. But the unsettling feeling persisted, a low hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. Then the sound started. It began subtly, like the visual anomalies. A faint dripping noise from the direction of the bathroom. Drip, 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 annoying but mundane. I got up to check, pushing open the bathroom door. The room was small, functional, echoing the blandness of the main area. The sink faucet was tightly closed. The shower head was dry. No leaks. I listened intently. Silence. Complete, unnerving silence. I stepped back into the main room, closing the bathroom door firmly. And then drip, 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 same rhythm, same faint, echoing quality, seemingly originating from inside the closed bathroom again. I flung the door open. Silence. Checked everything again. Nothing. Closed the door. Drip. It was like a sound file on a loop, triggered by the door closing, but that made no sense. There were no visible sensors, no speakers. I tried leaving the door ajar. The dripping stopped. I closed it completely. Drip, drip, drip. I repeated this several times. A grown man playing peek-a-boo with a phantom leak, feeling increasingly ridiculous and profoundly creeped out. Finally, I left the bathroom door wide open. The silence somehow more unnerving than the impossible dripping. That was just the opening act. Soon, other sounds joined the performance. A low hum that seemed to vibrate in my teeth, starting and stopping abruptly. A faint, repetitive scratching from behind one of the walls, like rats, but too rhythmic, too consistent. Then came the whispers. Just on the edge of hearing, like snippets of conversation from another room, impossible in this isolated unit. Male, female, sometimes childlike voices, none clear enough to understand, just brief, sibilant bursts of sound that vanished when I tried to focus on them. Was this the augmented reality? A poorly calibrated auditory illusion? It felt less like an enhancement and more like a system malfunction, or perhaps auditory hallucinations kicking in. The visual glitches were also ramping up. The flickering outside the window became more pronounced, sometimes momentarily distorting the shape of the neighboring unit, making it seem to bulge or warp before snapping back to normal. Inside, things got weirder. I placed my burner phone still off, as instructed on the coffee table. Turned away to examine a particularly uninspired landscape print on the walls. Was the paint bubbling slightly? Or was that just the light? When I looked back, the phone was sitting at a slightly different angle, maybe an inch to the left. I knew I hadn't touched it. I put it back precisely where it was, using a faint mark on the cheap wood veneer as a guide. Turned away again, counted to 10. Looked back. It had shifted again, this time closer to the edge. My heart hammered. This wasn't subtle. This was objects moving. I started noticing inconsistencies in textures. The grain on the coffee table seemed to momentarily swim, resolving into patterns that looked almost like circuitry before smoothing out again. The fabric on the sofa flickered between its dull beige and a richer, deeper color for a split second. Looking into the small mirror above the kitchenette sink, my own reflection seemed to lag fractionally behind my movements, like a bad video call connection. And sometimes, just sometimes, did the eyes in the reflection look wrong? Darker, wider, holding an expression that wasn't mine. I'd lean closer, scrutinizing, but it would snap back to normal, leaving me questioning my own perception. This had to be the fully immersive sensory experience, right? This bizarre, unsettling corruption of reality. But it wasn't integrated, it was invasive. It wasn't enhancing, it was destabilizing. My VR developer brain was screaming foul play. This wasn't elegant tech. Good AR/VR aims for seamlessness, believability. This felt jagged, broken, hostile, like reality itself had faulty code. And I was trapped inside the debugging process. The instruction, no outside recording devices, gnawed at me. They knew this happened. They didn't want proof getting out. Defiantly, fueled by a mix of fear and scientific curiosity, I risked turning on the burner phone, quickly opening the camera app. I pointed it at the coffee table, hoping to catch the phone shifting again. The screen displayed only blackness. The camera app was functional, the lens wasn't covered, but it refused to show the room. I tried the front camera, blackness. It was like the phone's sensors were completely blind to this environment. Or perhaps the environment was actively blocking them. The message was clear: no observation allowed. I quickly turned the phone off again, the landlord's vague threat about other consequences echoing in my mind. Panic began to set in. I was alone hours from anywhere, in a place where the basic laws of physics seemed optional. The sun began to set, painting the drab room in shades of orange and gray, and the glitches intensified with the fading light. Shadows seemed to pool in corners, deeper and darker than they should be. Sometimes, they seemed to detach from the objects casting them, elongating or shifting independently before snapping back into place. And then I saw it, the first person. I was standing by the window again, morbidly fascinated by the way the twilight seemed to stutter across the gravel outside. In my peripheral vision, reflected dimly in the window pane, a tall, slender figure stood silently in the corner of the room behind me. Motionless, I froze, every muscle tensing, my breath hitched. Slowly, deliberately, I turned around. Nothing. Just the empty corner, the deepening shadows, the oppressive silence punctuated by the phantom hum that had started up again. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "Okay, Noah," I whispered, my voice shaky. "Okay, peripheral hallucination. Stress reaction. Totally normal under these circumstances." But I didn't believe it. The image had been too clear, too solid, even reflected in the glass. I needed to get out, just for a bit. Fresh air, perspective. I fumbled with the lock on the main door, my hands slick with sweat. The brass key felt unnaturally cold. Finally, the lock clicked, and I pulled the door open, stepping out into the cool evening air. The relief was immediate but short-lived. Across the gravel patch, standing partially obscured by the shadow of Unit 7A, was another figure. This one wasn't a peripheral glimpse. It was there. Vaguely human shaped but indistinct, like a statue made of compressed static or smoke. It didn't move, didn't react to my presence. It just stood there. Watching, I stared, unable to breathe, unable to think. Was this part of the show? A projection? An actor? Or was it another glitch, a more complex manifestation of whatever force was at play here? As I watched, mesmerized by terror, its form seemed to shimmer, to lose cohesion, like a badly tuned analog TV signal. Edges blurred, features dissolved into static, and then, in the space of a few seconds, it simply wasn't there anymore. Vanished into the twilight. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut, fumbling to lock it. My hands were shaking violently now. This wasn't tech. Not any tech I knew. This wasn't a simulation I could analyze or debug. This felt older, stranger, more fundamental. The promise of a fully immersive sensory experience had been fulfilled, but not in the way I'd imagined. My senses weren't just being fed information, they were being actively corrupted, overwritten. And the reality being woven around me wasn't digital. It felt terrifyingly real, even as it tore itself apart at the seams. The thought hit me with sickening clarity: this place wasn't augmenting reality, it was replacing it. And I was trapped on the wrong side of the veil. The faint sound of childlike laughter echoed from the closed bathroom, impossibly clear, before cutting off into dead silence. The glitches weren't random. They were getting personal. The childlike laughter echoing from the bathroom wasn't just unnerving, it felt like a turning point. A switch flipped somewhere in the unseen architecture of this nightmare, shifting the glitches from passive anomalies to something actively malevolent. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming a palpable pressure against my skin. A prickling certainty that unseen eyes followed my every move. Paranoia wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was a survival instinct. I retreated from the main door, backing further into the room, my eyes darting between the windows, the corners, the bathroom door I'd left ajar. The silence that followed the laughter was heavy, suffocating, pregnant with anticipation. Then, the coffee table scraped across the laminate floor. Not a subtle shift this time, but a loud, deliberate drag of several inches moving towards me. I yelped, scrambling backward until my back hit the wall. The burner phone tumbled off the edge and hit the floor with a dull crack. My voice, distorted and high, pitched like a recording played too fast, whispered from the direction of the kitchenette. "Leaving so soon, Noah?" My blood ran cold. It wasn't just hearing things anymore, it knew my name. It was using my voice. The perceptual echo chamber. The name of the listing clicked horribly into place. Was this place recording sensory input and playing it back twisted and broken? Or was it reading my thoughts, my fears, and projecting them back at me as corrupted reality? The lights in the room began to flicker erratically, plunging the space into momentary strobing darkness. In those fractions of a second, the geometry of the room seemed to warp. Walls pulsed as if breathing, the ceiling seemed to lower oppressively, and the floor felt unstable beneath my feet, tilting slightly like the deck of a ship. During one flash, the bland landscape painting on the wall was replaced by a swirling vortex of black static, a void that seemed to drink the light. In the next flash, it was back to the boring painting, but the feeling of wrongness lingered. Then, the figures returned. Not just glimpses or reflections this time. One materialized directly between me and the main door, taller than the one I'd seen outside. Impossibly thin, limbs too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Its form was still indistinct, like layered exposures on old film, flickering, never quite resolving. It didn't have a face, just a smudge of deeper shadow where features should be. It didn't move towards me, but its presence was an impassable barrier of pure dread. Another flicker, and a smaller figure, childlike in size but just as distorted, stood beside the sofa, head cocked at an impossible angle. It radiated the same silent, static-filled menace. Were these the source of the whispers, the laughter? Were they echoes of previous occupants, trapped and replayed by this place? Or were they something else entirely, beings native to whatever fractured dimension I'd stumbled into? My technical mind, my developer's instinct to analyze, was completely overwhelmed. This wasn't code, it was chaos. It wasn't hardware, it was horror made manifest. The dark web listing, the augmented reality, the fully immersive sensory experience, it was all a lie. Or rather, a terrifyingly literal truth. This wasn't technology simulating reality. It was something else wearing reality like a poorly fitting skin suit, and it was starting to shed. Sounds assaulted me from all directions. The dripping returned, louder now, seeming to come from inside my own head. The scratching behind the walls intensified, becoming frantic, desperate. Static bursts crackled in the air like phantom sparks. And underneath it all, that low, a bone vibrating hum intensified, making my vision blur, my stomach churn. The figure by the door slowly raised one elongated, flickering arm, pointing towards the closed bedroom door. Simultaneously, the childlike figure beside the sofa turned its featureless head in the same direction. A silent command, an invitation. My instincts screamed trap, but staying here, cornered, felt like waiting for annihilation. The main exit was blocked. The windows, were they even real windows anymore? They seemed to show shifting, impossible landscapes one moment, and pitch darkness the next. The bedroom was the only other option. Heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, I pushed myself off the wall and edged sideways, keeping my eyes locked on the two figures. They didn't move to intercept me, their stillness somehow more terrifying than aggression. Reaching the bedroom door, my hand trembling, I twisted the knob and threw it open. It wasn't a bedroom. The space beyond the doorframe defied description. It was a riot of impossible geometry, shifting planes of sickly colored light, and echoing, fragmented sounds. It felt vast and infinite, yet claustrophobically close. Fragments of other places seemed embedded within it, a glimpse of a rain-slicked city street upside down, a patch of sun-drenched desert sand swirling like water, a face, monstrously distorted, screaming silently before dissolving into pixels. It was like looking into the raw, broken code of existence. And floating within that chaos, suspended like flies in amber, were more figures, dozens, maybe hundreds, all flickering, indistinct, trapped echoes in the perceptual chamber. The sight broke something in my mind. A primal scream tore from my throat. Raw and unfiltered, I slammed the door shut. The horrifying afterimage burned into my retinas. The lock clicked shut of its own accord from the inside. Turning back to the main room, gasping for breath, I saw the figures had moved. They were closer now, converging on me slowly, relentlessly. The tall one glided across the floor, its movement jerky, like corrupted animation. The small one scuttled, its limbs flickering through multiple positions at once. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of ozone and something else, something indescribably ancient and decayed. This was it. This was how it ended. Consumed by the glitch, absorbed into the echo chamber, becoming another flickering phantom for the next poor bastard who rented Unit 7B off the dark web. No. A surge of adrenaline, pure animal terror, cut through the paralysis. I wasn't going to be another echo. I launched myself towards the window. Not the door, the window. The figures reacted, surging forward faster, their forms blurring. Static crackling audibly around them. I didn't look back. I grabbed the cheap plastic chair from the kitchenette, swung it with all my might against the window pane. Instead of shattering, the glass rippled like water. The view outside dissolved into swirling static, mirroring the chaos I'd glimpsed in the bedroom. For a horrifying second, I thought I was trapped. But the frame itself gave way. With a screech of tortured metal and splintering wood, the entire window unit tore loose from the wall, falling outwards. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled through the jagged opening, tumbling onto the damp gravel outside, sucking in breaths of cool, blessedly normal night air. I pushed myself up, ignoring the scrapes and bruises. Behind me, from the gaping hole where the window had been, the featureless face of the tall figure stared out, framed by swirling static, the low hum emanating from the darkness within. I ran. I ran faster than I thought possible, fueled by sheer terror. Away from Unit 7B, away from the cluster of bungalows, down the gravel track, ignoring the stitch in my side, the burning in my lungs. I didn't stop running until the gravel turned to pavement, until I saw the distant glow of highway lights. I flagged down the first car that passed. A bewildered trucker who probably thought I was high or insane. Maybe I was. I'm writing this now from a motel room hundreds of miles away. I ditched the burner phone near that horrible place. I haven't slept properly since. Every shadow seems too deep, every quiet moment feels filled with phantom whispers. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see a flicker, a momentary distortion in the air. My reflection sometimes seems slow. They told me on that dark web forum it was experimental augmented reality. Fully immersive sensory experience. They lied. Or maybe they didn't understand what they were leasing out. It wasn't technology. It was a hole in the world, a place where reality breaks down and echoes of perception become terrifyingly real. A trap disguised as a novelty. I went looking for the future of immersion, and I found something ancient and hungry, hidden behind a listing on the dark web. Noah Peterson reporting off duty. Permanently. I don't think the glitches ever really stop once you've seen them. I think I brought some of the echo back with me. My name's Ethan Hayes. It's probably not a name you'd recognize unless you frequent the darker, dustier corners of the internet where truth often hides behind layers of encryption and anonymity. I'm a freelance journalist, but not the kind chasing city council meetings or interviewing local celebrities. No, my beat is the fringe, the unexplained, the stories that mainstream outlets wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, let alone allocate a budget for. I delve into urban legends that might not be legends, conspiracy theories that feel chillingly plausible, and the strange, often terrifying occurrences that happen just outside the periphery of everyday life. It's not glamorous work. It barely pays the bills, involves a lot of late nights fueled by cheap coffee, and earns me more skeptical glances than accolades. But there's a compulsion to it, an addiction to peeling back the veneer of normalcy and staring into the abyss, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever stares back. This compulsion led me inevitably to the dark web. Not for the illicit goods or disturbing content it's infamous for, but for the whispers, the rumors, the potential leads that couldn't survive in the clear light of the surface web. It's a digital morass navigated through anonymizing browsers like Tor, a place where paranoia is a prerequisite for survival. I'd spent countless hours sifting through poorly designed forums, encrypted chat logs, and dead-end links, usually finding nothing but boastful trolls and dead air. But occasionally, you stumble onto something different. That's how I found the listing. It wasn't on a notorious marketplace, but tucked away in a niche forum dedicated to unique travel experiences. A euphemism I quickly learned covered everything from exploring abandoned Soviet bunkers to visiting alleged haunted locations off the official grid. This particular link promised undocumented rentals, properties not listed on any conventional platform, offering absolute privacy and experiences beyond the mundane. The language was deliberately vague, tantalizingly obscure. Most listings were obvious scams or laughably amateurish. But one caught my eye. No flashy title nits and a string of alphanumeric code presumably identifying the property. The description was minimal: secluded cabin, 3 nights minimum, payment via Monero only, contact for key exchange protocol. Below this were 3 grainy photographs. One showed a simple rustic cabin nestled deep within a thick forest, pines pressing close on all sides. Another depicted a sparsely furnished living room, a worn sofa, a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table. The third was a blurry shot of a window looking out into dense, featureless woods. There was nothing overtly sinister about them, yet they possessed a strange, liminal quality. The lighting was off, casting long, unnatural shadows. The angles were slightly tilted. Nothing seemed quite centered, quite right. It looked lonely, desolate. Against every rational instinct screaming scam, or the journalist in me, the thrill seeker, the abyss gazer, was hooked. Undocumented, secluded, dark web exclusive. This screamed story potential. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a former safe house, a site of some forgotten crime, or just a quirky hermit's off-grid getaway? The ambiguity was the lure. Following the cryptic instructions, I sent an encrypted message expressing interest. The reply came hours later, equally terse, providing a crypto wallet address and instructions for the key. It would be left in a magnetic lockbox attached to the underside of a specific, rusted mailbox located miles from the cabin itself, identifiable only by a faded, almost invisible chalk mark. No host name, no phone number, just cold impersonal instructions. The payment felt like tossing coins into a black hole, but a few days later the transaction confirmed. I found myself driving deep into the Appalachian foothills. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to deeply rutted dirt tracks that scraped the undercarriage of my aging sedan. Cell service vanished an hour back. The GPS, relying on cached maps, became increasingly hesitant, the blue dot hovering uncertainly over vast swaths of green. The directions gleaned from the forum, cross-referenced with the coordinates, led me down paths that barely qualified as such, overgrown branches whipping against the windows, the forest canopy thickening overhead until the late afternoon sun struggled to penetrate, casting the woods in a premature twilight. Finding the mailbox was an ordeal in itself. It stood listing drunkenly by the side of an utterly deserted stretch of track, exactly as described, rusted, battered, almost swallowed by encroaching weeds. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled underneath until they connected with the cold metal of the lockbox. Inside, a single old-fashioned brass key lay waiting. No note, no welcome packet, just the key. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the buzzing of unseen insects and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The isolation was palpable, a heavy blanket smothering the air. Another 20 minutes of careful driving, following the final, barely discernible turn-off, and I saw the cabin. It looked exactly like the grainy photograph, yet somehow starker, more real, and infinitely more unsettling in person. It sat in a small, lumpy clearing, the tall pines surrounding it like silent, judgmental sentinels. The wood was dark, weathered, possibly stained by decades of rain and snow. A thin plume of smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting the previous occupants, if any, hadn't been gone long, or perhaps some automated heating system was active. But who would automate heating in a place rented via anonymous crypto payments? I parked the car, the engine's ticking cool down sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Grabbing my overnight bag and my equipment case, laptop, cameras, audio recorder, I walked towards the cabin. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth, pine needles, and wood smoke. There were no other sounds. No birdsong, no rustling of animals in the undergrowth. Just silence. The porch steps groaned under my weight. The brass key, cold in my hand, slid into the lock with a well-oiled click that echoed slightly. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself against, I didn't know what. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The interior matched the second photo, though it felt smaller, more cluttered than the image suggested. A threadbare rug covered uneven floorboards. The sofa sagged in the middle. The stone fireplace was dark and cold. Despite the smoke I'd seen, perhaps it was from a wood stove in another room. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of light filtering through the grimy windows. The immediate impression was one of neglect, of a place long uninhabited yet recently tidied. But beneath the dust and the gloom, something else began to prickle at the edges of my awareness. It started subtly. A feeling. The kind of feeling you get when you're walking alone at night and sense footsteps behind you, only to turn and find nothing there. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct, undeniable impression of being observed. My eyes scanned the room, automatically seeking the source. And that's when I noticed the taxidermy. It wasn't immediately obvious in the photos, lost in the shadows and the poor resolution. But here, in the dim light of the cabin, it was unavoidable. A deer head mounted above the fireplace, its glass eyes seeming unnervingly focused on the doorway. A stuffed owl perched on a high shelf, its head cocked as if listening intently. A fox, frozen mid-stride, crouched near the floorboards in a dark corner. Even a rather sad-looking squirrel clutching a nut, forever poised on the mantelpiece. Standard rustic cabin decor, perhaps, if a bit morbid. Yet the placement felt deliberate. The deer watched the entrance. The owl seemed to survey the entire room. The fox guarded the hallway leading deeper into the cabin. Their glassy stares felt too direct, too knowing. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. Jet lag. I muttered to myself, though I hadn't flown. Road fatigue. Overactive imagination. I dropped my bags by the sofa, the thud echoing slightly in the quiet room. I ran a hand over my face. I was a journalist, supposed to be objective, rational, getting spooked by stuffed animals. pathetic, but the feeling didn't dissipate, intensified. It wasn't just the taxidermy. As I stood there, trying to get my bearings, the sensation shifted, expanded. It felt less like being watched by something in the room, and more like being watched by the room itself. The walls, paneled in dark, knotty wood, seemed to absorb the light, the silence. I ran my hand along the rough surface of the wall nearest the door. It was cool to the touch, solid. Just wood, yeah. I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were peering out from the knots in the timber, from the cracks between the planks, from the very shadows that clung to the corners. The house itself, it felt awake. And it was watching me. The hair on my arms stood on end. This wasn't just road fatigue. This was something else. My story, it seemed, had already begun. Dismissing the initial wave of paranoia as first night jitters was easier said than done. The silence in the cabin wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. Every creak of the floorboards under my own weight sounded like an accusation. Every gust of wind rattling the window panes felt like a prelude. Still, I had a job to do, or at least a self-assigned mission. If this place held a story, I needed to uncover it, and letting my imagination run wild wouldn't help. Objective observation. That was the key. I forced myself to conduct a more thorough sweep of the cabin. Beyond the main living area was a small, cramped kitchen. The appliances were ancient, a rusting gas stove, a humming refrigerator that smelled faintly of mildew, and countertops stained with things I didn't want to identify. The cupboards held a bizarre assortment, a few chipped plates, mismatched cutlery, jars of unidentifiable dried herbs, and an alarming number of empty glass bottles. It felt less like a functional kitchen and more like a stage set designed to look like one. The window above the sink offered the same view as the one in the living room, dense, impenetrable woods. No matter which window I looked through, the scenery felt oppressively uniform, as if the cabin wasn't just in the woods, but surrounded by the exact same stretch of woods copied and pasted on all sides. Next was the bathroom, a clawfoot tub stained yellow, a toilet that gurgled ominously after a tentative flush, and a mirror so clouded with age or grime that my reflection looked spectral and distinct. The only window in here was small, high up, and inexplicably boarded over from the outside. Thick, weathered planks were nailed across it, blocking any light or view. Why? An attempt to keep something out, or perhaps to keep something in. The thought sent a fresh chill down my spine, colder than the damp air in the room. There was only one bedroom. A simple iron bed frame dominated the small space, covered with a thin, scratchy blanket. A rickety wooden dresser stood against one wall, its drawers empty save for dust and a faint, cloying scent that reminded me of old potpourri mixed with something vaguely metallic. Again, the overwhelming impression was one of impersonality, of a space designed to be occupied but never truly lived in. But it was here, in the bedroom, that the feeling intensified again. Standing in the center of the room, I felt at strongest the distinct, unwavering sensation of being scrutinized. My eyes darted to the walls, the familiar dark wood paneling. Here, the knots in the wood seemed more numerous, clustered in ways that, if you squinted, almost resembled peering eyes. Hallucinations, pareidolia. My rational mind offered explanations, but the primal fear tightening my chest wasn't buying it. I decided to unpack my equipment, needing the familiar routine to ground myself. I set up a small digital audio recorder on the mantelpiece in the living room, hoping to catch any unusual sounds, anomalous creaks, whispers, anything the structure itself might produce. I took out my camera, snapping photos of the rooms, the taxidermy, the boarded-up window, the strange patterns in the wood grain. Looking through the lens somehow felt safer, creating a barrier between me and the oppressive atmosphere. As dusk began to creep into the cabin, swallowing the already weak light, the house seemed to come alive in subtle, insidious ways. The vague feeling of being watched sharpened into specific, localized sensations. Standing near the fireplace, I felt a sudden, intense cold spot drift past me, though there was no draft. Later, while reviewing photos on my camera in the bedroom, I heard it, a faint, dry scratching sound. It seemed to come from inside the wall right behind the dresser. I froze, listening intently. Silence. I held my breath, straining my ears. Nothing, only the frantic beat of my own pulse. But I'd heard it. I was sure of it. I tried the light switches. A couple of bare bulbs flickered reluctantly to life, casting a harsh, yellow glare that did little to dispel the shadows pooling in the corners. It only seemed to make the textures of the walls stand out more, the knots and grain patterns twisting into more suggestive shapes in the stark illumination. The electricity hummed erratically, a low, buzzing counterpoint to the oppressive silence. Remembering the smoke I'd seen earlier, I examined the fireplace. It was cold, swept clean, no ashes, no lingering warmth. There was no other wood stove. Where had the smoke come from? I went back outside onto the porch. The air was significantly colder now, the woods around the cabin merging into an amorphous mass of black. Looking up at the chimney, I saw nothing. No smoke, no heat haze. Had I imagined it? Or had it stopped? The inconsistency was just another thread in the tapestry of wrongness that defined this place. Back inside, the feeling of observation was relentless. It followed me from room to room. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, scanning the walls, peering into dark corners. The taxidermy animals felt particularly malevolent in the artificial light, their glass eyes glinting, seeming to track my movements. I tried to focus on my notes, sitting at the rough wooden table in the living room, laptop open. But the words blurred, the silence pressed in, punctuated only by the house's groans and the maddening buzz of the lights. And then the whispers started. They were faint, barely audible, like voices on the edge of hearing, or the rustle of dry leaves caught in the wind. Were they coming from outside, or, chillingly, were they closer? I strained to make out words, patterns, anything coherent, but it was just sibilant, indistinct murmuring, seeming to emanate from the very air around me, or perhaps from the walls themselves. I activated the audio recorder again, placing it in the center of the table, speaking aloud to timestamp the event, describing the sounds. My voice trembled slightly. It was during this second sweep, driven by a renewed sense of unease and a desperate need for answers, that I found the door. It was in the short hallway between the living room and the bedroom, almost hidden in shadow, easily missed. It wasn't just closed, it was locked. A heavy-duty padlock, incongruously modern compared to the rest of the cabin's hardware, secured a thick wooden bar across the door. This wasn't a closet. It felt purposeful. What was behind it? Why was it so securely fastened? My journalistic curiosity warred with raw fear. Part of me desperately wanted to find bolt cutters, to force it open and confront whatever secret it held. The other part screamed at me to leave it alone, that some doors were best left unopened. I pushed against it gently, solid oak or something equally sturdy, no give. I shone my flashlight on the padlock, looking for a brand name, any identifying marks. Nothing, just cold, hard steel. Leaning closer, I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. At first, only silence. Then, maybe possibly a faint, rhythmic sound, a low thrumming or perhaps breathing, slow, deep, raspy breaths coming from the other side. Or was it just the blood pounding in my own ears, amplified by the wood, by the fear? I couldn't be sure. I snatched my ear away, heart hammering against my ribs. Okay. This was escalating beyond creepy ambience. Locked rooms, disembodied sounds, the unwavering sensation of being watched by the very structure I was inside. This was tangible. This was real. I checked my camera. The photos seemed normal, no ghostly apparitions. I rewound the audio recorder slightly, listening back to the section where I thought I heard scratching. There it was, faint but undeniable on the recording, a dry, rhythmic scraping. Then, during the period I'd heard the whispers, nothing. The recorder picked up my own voice, the hum of the lights, the creaks of the house, but not the murmuring sounds that had seemed so present just moments before. It was as if the whispers existed only for me, or perhaps operated on a frequency the microphone couldn't capture. Sleep felt like a distant memory, an impossible luxury. How could I close my eyes in this place? Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sound felt magnified. The house was awake and it knew I was here. The promise of a unique story had led me here, but now, trapped by isolation and my own obsessive curiosity, I felt less like a journalist uncovering a story and more like a fly caught in a web, waiting for the spider to show itself. The night stretched before me, long and dark, and the walls continued to watch. The night bled away with agonizing slowness, marked not by hours on a clock I'd stopped looking, but by the escalating frequency of the house's intrusions. Sleep was impossible. Every time I drifted towards exhaustion, a sudden loud bang from within the walls, like a giant fist striking timber, would jolt me back to terrified alertness. The scratching sounds were no longer confined to one wall, but seemed to skitter randomly around the cabin, sometimes low near the floor, sometimes high near the ceiling. The whispers returned, swirling around me, still indistinct but carrying a palpable malice, a cold amusement. At one point, sitting hunched on the sofa, clutching a heavy fireplace poker, I watched, frozen, as the drawer of the bedroom dresser slid open a few inches on its own, remained poised for a long moment, then slowly slid shut again with a soft click. Rationalization had completely abandoned me. This wasn't drafts or settling noises or an overactive imagination fueled by isolation. This was deliberate. This was communication, of a sort. The house was playing with me, testing my nerves, savoring my fear. The feeling of being watched had evolved into something physical, a heavy pressure on my chest, a prickling sensation across my skin as if countless invisible insects were crawling on me. The air itself felt thick, charged with static energy. My tech offered little comfort or proof. The audio recorder now captured only loud bursts of static whenever the whispers started, and the camera's screen would flicker and distort if I pointed it towards certain corners or the locked door for too long. That door. It drew my attention like a magnet. The faint breathing sound I'd heard earlier seemed to have stopped, replaced occasionally by a low, deep thrumming, like some massive, hidden machinery idling just beneath the surface of perception. Or maybe it was a heartbeat. The padlock gleamed dully in the weak light. a modern sentinel guarding an archaic secret. My compulsion, the driving force behind my entire career, surged through the terror. I had to know what was behind it. Leaving without finding out felt like a betrayal of my own purpose, even if that purpose was currently leading me towards madness or worse. Armed with the poker more for bolstering courage than any practical use against solid oak and steel, I approached the door again around what felt like the deepest hour of the night. The thrumming intensified as I got closer. I examined the padlock again, futilely hoping for a flaw, a weakness. None. Brute force seemed the only option, but the poker was unlikely to break the lock or the heavy wooden bar. I jammed the tip of the poker into the gap between the door and the frame, trying to pry it, lever it open. The wood groaned but held firm. Then something shifted. Not the door, but the feeling in the room. The omnipresent sense of being watched focused sharpened, becoming an intense, almost physical pressure emanating directly from the locked door. The thrumming stopped abruptly. Silence descended so profound it hurt my ears. And then, with agonizing slowness, the heavy wooden bar securing the door began to lift. I stumbled back, poker held defensively, heart trying to batter its way out of my chest. The bar rose silently, smoothly, as if lifted by invisible hands, until it cleared the brackets holding it in place. It hung suspended in the air for a moment before retracting into the wall beside the doorframe with a soft schlick. Then, the padlock clicked open, seemingly of its own accord, and fell to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed endlessly in the silence. The door itself remained closed. An invitation. A trap. It didn't matter, I was committed. Taking a shaky breath, I reached out, gripped the cold metal doorknob and pulled. The door swung inward silently, revealing not a room but darkness. A profound, absolute darkness that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight beam just inches past the threshold. But it wasn't empty. From within that impenetrable blackness came the source of the thrumming, now clear, a slow, deep, wet pulsing sound, accompanied by the faint, unmistakable smell of ozone and damp earth, and something else, something metallic and organic. My flashlight beam flickered violently, and in those strobing flashes I caught glimpses, not of machinery, not of a control room, but of structure. Walls that weren't wood but seemed coated in a glistening, dark membrane that pulsed faintly in time with the sound. Wires thick as arteries snaked across the surfaces, embedded within the pulsing membrane, converging towards a central point lost in the darkness. It wasn't a hidden room in the house. It felt like I was looking into the house, into its very heart. And suspended in the center, barely visible, was something. Not a creature, not a machine, but a complex knot of the pulsing arteries and dark tissue, seeming to contract and expand with the rhythmic thrumming. The house wasn't haunted, the house was alive. A wave of nausea and terror washed over me. This was the source of the awareness, the consciousness that had been watching me, toying with me. This was the house's engine, its mind. As I stared horrified, a shape seemed to detach itself from the central mass, a tendril of shadow or substance, reaching out from the darkness towards the doorway, towards me. That broke the paralysis. I slammed the door shut, hearing a wet, sucking sound from within as it closed, and fumbled frantically to replace the padlock, though I knew it was useless. The house had let me see it could let itself out just as easily. "Get out," I gasped, the words barely audible. "Get out now." Panic lent me speed. I abandoned the poker, grabbed my bags, my useless equipment, and scrambled towards the main door. Behind me, I heard the lock on the hidden door click open again. The thrumming sound intensified, seeming to vibrate through the very floorboards. The taxidermy eyes glinted, and I could have sworn the deer head's gaze followed me as I ran. The front door felt impossibly heavy. I threw my shoulder against it, bursting out onto the porch and into the pre-dawn chill. The woods were still dark, but the absolute blackness was beginning to soften at the eastern horizon. I didn't look back. I sprinted towards my car, fumbling for the keys, my fingers numb and clumsy. The car door lock seemed to fight me, then finally yielded. I threw my bags onto the passenger seat and jammed the key into the ignition. Click. Nothing. No, I whimpered, trying again. Click. The battery was dead or drained. The house's influence. I didn't care. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal uselessly. Click. Behind me, the cabin door creaked open wider. I couldn't see anything in the dim light, but I felt it, the immense, ancient awareness focusing on me, pouring out of the open doorway. One more try. I turned the key, praying to any deity that might listen. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared reluctantly to life. Not waiting for it to warm up, I slammed the gear shift into reverse, spun the wheel, and stomped on the accelerator. Mud and gravel sprayed as the tires fought for purchase. The car fishtailed wildly on the rutted track, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers trying to hold me back. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror until I hit the slightly more maintained dirt road miles away. When I finally did, the cabin was long gone, swallowed by the trees and the lingering darkness. I drove for hours, fueled by adrenaline and terror, not stopping until I reached a town large enough to have multiple gas stations and the comforting anonymity of crowds. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked my equipment later in a cheap motel room. The audio files containing the scratching were intact, but everything recorded after that point, especially during the whispers or near the hidden door, was corrupted, reduced to garbled static and digital noise. The photos were similarly affected. Shots of the hidden door or the general interior were blurred, distorted, or completely black. The photos of the taxidermy remained disturbingly clear. The dark web forum where I found the listing was gone. The link was dead, the entire domain vanished as if it never existed. I had my testimony, a few eerie photos of stuffed animals, a corrupted audio file of scratching sounds, and a profound lingering trauma. No verifiable proof. Just another crazy story from the fringes easily dismissed. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt. The house was alive, an ancient, aware entity using a dark web rental listing as bait. For what purpose? To feed on fear, to observe, to collect stories or perhaps souls. I don't know. All I know is that I still feel watched sometimes, even now, months later, hundreds of miles away. Sometimes in the dead of night, I hear faint scratching sounds from within the walls of my own apartment. And I never, ever book rentals online without triple checking they aren't listed anywhere near the shadowy corners of the web. Some stories aren't worth the discovery. Some doors should remain locked. And some houses watch you long after you've left. Call me Marcus Bell. That's the name on my driver's license. Anyway, most people just see a guy who runs a moderately successful online business selling vintage electronics, someone who keeps to himself. They don't know about the other part of my life, the part that truly consumes me. I collect weird stuff, and I don't mean quirky salt and pepper shakers or stamps with printing errors. I mean things that make most people's skin crawl. Oddities, morbid memorabilia, artifacts humming with a history best left undisturbed. My apartment isn't decorated in the traditional sense. Forget tasteful prints or family photos. My walls boast things like a preserved two-headed calf fetus floating in murky formaldehyde, a collection of Victorian mourning jewelry woven from the hair of the deceased, alleged cursed idols procured from questionable sources in Southeast Asia, and medical instruments that look like they were designed for torture rather than healing. There's a certain resonance to these items. A weight. They whisper stories the sanitized, brightly lit world tries desperately to ignore. For me, it's not just about possession, it's about proximity to the fringes of human experience, to the darkness that lurks beneath the mundane. It's the thrill of holding something that carries the echo of death, madness, or the truly inexplicable. Most people seek comfort. I seek the shiver down my spine, the tangible proof that reality is far stranger, and often more terrifying than we care to admit. My business provides the means, but the hunt provides the purpose. Mainstream auction sites are usually too tame, too vetted. The real treasures, the truly unsettling pieces, are found elsewhere. Obscure forums hidden behind layers of encryption, back alley deals conducted in hushed tones, whispers passed between fellow travelers on the shadowed paths of collecting. You develop a nose for it, a sixth sense for where the genuinely bizarre might surface. It was during one of my late-night digital spelunking sessions, trawling through a particularly exclusive invitation-only corner of the web, not quite the dark web proper, but certainly adjacent, a gray market for the esoteric and the forbidden, that I stumbled upon it. The site itself was minimalist, stark black background, cryptic symbols serving as navigation icons. Listings were text, only often vague, relying on reputation and coded language. But this one stood out. It wasn't listed under artifacts or curios. It was under experiences. The title was simple, The Collector's Suite. The description, however, ignited something primal within me. It spoke of a short-term rental opportunity, an apartment available for booking described as a leaving museum of the macabre. My breath caught. It went on to state in chillingly plain terms that the suite was the former residence and curated exhibition space of a highly eccentric, potentially dangerous, and now conspicuously absent collector known only as the curator. The listing hinted at a collection that dwarfed my own, not just in scale but in sheer audacity. It spoke of pieces acquired through means, beyond conventional ethics, items with provenances soaked in rumor and tragedy. There were no photos, only evocative text painting a picture of rooms overflowing with the grotesque and the forbidden. Anatomical horrors, forbidden texts bound in unknown skins, devices of forgotten sciences, relics from rituals best left unnamed. It promised an immersive experience, a chance to live, if only for a few days, surrounded by the ultimate expression of dark collecting. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just an opportunity, it felt like a summons. The price was listed in Monero, a substantial sum, but strangely not astronomical. Almost reasonable considering the alleged uniqueness. That itself was slightly unnerving. Too good to be true, perhaps. But the pull was irresistible. The very real possibility of danger, hinted at in the description of the former owner, only added to the allure. What collector hasn't dreamed of stepping into the sanctum of a master, especially one who operated outside the bounds of law and sanity? I didn't hesitate. There was no logical debate in my mind, no weighing of pros and cons. It was pure, unadulterated compulsion. The kind of feeling I get when I know absolutely no, I've found something truly special, something meant for me to witness. Using the site's integrated, anonymized payment system, I transferred the cryptocurrency. Within minutes, a confirmation message appeared, equally stark, equally anonymous. It contained encrypted instructions, an address in a city several states away, a date for my arrival, and a complex alphanumeric code for a smart lock. No host name, no contact number, just the cold, hard data. The next 2 weeks were a blur of anticipation. I tried researching the curator, cross-referencing the vague hints from the listing with known figures in the underground collecting world. Nothing. It was as if the man or woman, or whatever they were, had never existed outside that encrypted listing. A ghostess only fueled my obsession. Who was this person? What drove them, and what treasures, what horrors had they left behind in that suit? Packing was minimal. Clothes, laptop, and my high-resolution camera-rigged documentation was essential. The journey itself felt charged with significance. The flight, the anonymous airport hotel, the prepaid burner phone I acquired just in case. The city was old, a place of brick and iron, with a history etched into its grimy facades. The taxi ride took me away from the revitalized downtown core, deeper into neighborhoods where gentrification hadn't yet scrubbed away the layers of time and neglect. Finally, the cab pulled up in front of a narrow, 4-story building sandwiched between a boarded-up laundromat and a pawn shop displaying dusty, forgotten relics in its barred window. It might have been grand once, maybe a century ago, but now it looked weary. Dark brick, ornate window frames obscured by grime, a heavy oak door that seemed to promise secrets rather than welcome. There was no sign indicating it was an Airbnb or any kind of short-term rental. It just was. I paid the driver, hefted my bag, and approached the entrance. My breath misted in the cool air. Checking the encrypted message on my burner phone, I located the smart lock, a sleek, modern device incongruously attached to the ancient doorframe. My fingers trembled slightly as I keyed in the long, complex code. There was a soft electronic click. I pushed the heavy door open. It groaned in protest, revealing not a brightly lit lobby, but a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The air hung thick and still, carrying a peculiar scent, dust, old paper, a faint chemical tang like ozone or formaldehyde, and something else, something vaguely organic, like dried flowers or decaying leather. It wasn't entirely unpleasant, just strange. Heavy. There were stairs leading up, and a single, unmarked door at the end of the hall. According to the final instruction, my destination was apartment 3B, 3rd floor. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself, I stepped over the threshold, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. It closed with a solid, echoing thud, sealing me inside. The hunt was over. The experience was about to begin. I started up the creaking stairs, the faint, strange scent growing stronger with each step. The climb up the narrow, creaking staircase felt longer than 3 floors. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the building. The air grew colder, the strange chemical and decay scent intensifying, mingling now with a dry, papery aroma like that of ancient books. The only light came from bare low-wattage bulbs dangling at each landing, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe just outside my peripheral vision. There were other doors on the 1st and 2nd floors, plain and numbered, but they looked unused, perhaps even sealed. No sounds came from behind them. It felt like I was the only living soul in the entire structure. Reaching the 3rd floor landing, I saw it immediately. Apartment 3B. Unlike the other nondescript doors I'd passed, this one was different. It was made of heavy, dark wood, possibly oak or ebony, intricately carved with swirling, almost organic patterns that seemed to shift and writhe if you stared too long. There were no markings, no number, but its position confirmed it was 3B. Beside it, almost hidden in the gloom, was a small, metallic lockbox. Consulting the encrypted message again on my burner phone, I found the secondary code. With trembling fingers, I punched it into the lockbox keypad. Another soft click, and the small door sprang open. Inside, nestled on faded velvet lining, was a single, ornate brass key. It felt heavy, cold, and strangely potent in my hand. I inserted the key into the lock on the carved door. It turned smoothly, silently, the mechanism feeling far newer and better maintained than anything else in this decaying building. Taking a final, steadying breath, I pushed the door inward. The air that greeted me was different from the hallway. The chemical tang was still there, sharper now, unmistakably formaldehyde, but overlaid with beeswax polish, old leather, and a faint, almost imperceptible metallic coppery note that tickled the back of my throat. The space was dimly lit not by harsh bulbs but by strategically placed spotlights, casting dramatic pools of illumination on curated displays, leaving the corners and ceilings shrouded in deep shadow. It was immediately clear that this wasn't just an apartment filled with stuff, it was a museum. A deeply personal, obsessive, and utterly terrifying museum. The contrast with the building's exterior decay was jarring. Inside apartment 3B, everything was immaculate. Polished wooden floors gleamed softly. Glass display cases shone dust-free. velvet ropes, the kind you see in actual museums, cordoned off certain areas. The sheer volume of items was staggering, far exceeding what I had imagined. It wasn't cluttered, it was dense, meticulously arranged. My collector's instincts screamed, overriding the initial wave of unease. My God, the pieces. To my left, a tall glass cabinet contained a series of wet specimens. Not just the usual frogs or fetal pigs. There were jars holding deformed human organs labeled in elegant spidery Latin script. A cyclopean lamb fetus. A set of conjoined twin skeletons, impossibly small, delicately articulated. Further along that wall, antique surgical instruments were laid out on velvet, gleaming wickedly under a spotlight, bone saws with intricate carvings on the handles, trepanning drills, speculums that defied easy identification of purpose. The main living area was dominated by larger exhibits. A life-size diorama depicted a Victorian operating theater, complete with wax figures of surgeons in blood-stained aprons gathered around a table where another figure lay, chest cavity open. The detail was incredible, nauseatingly realistic, down to the simulated viscera and the terrified expression frozen on the patient's wax face. Nearby stood a collection of taxidermy that defied nature, creatures stitched together from different animals, presented as genuine cryptids. A creature resembling a griffin, clearly composed of eagle and lion parts, but crafted with such skill it looked almost plausible. Jenny Hanover, a dried skate carved to resemble a devil, presented with a label claiming it was captured off the coast of Sumatra in 1888. Another section seemed dedicated to the occult. Heavy leather-bound books lay open on lecterns, their pages filled with dense, unreadable script and disturbing illustrations. Strange idols carved from dark wood and bone stared with vacant eyes from shadowed shelves. Ritual daggers, chalices crafted from what looked disturbingly like skulls, and intricate metal contraptions resembling astrolabes but aligned to no known celestial configuration. I pulled out my camera, the professional collector in me taking over. Documentation was paramount. I began moving slowly through the space, snapping high-resolution photos, zooming in on details, my initial apprehension momentarily forgotten, replaced by a scholar's fascination and a collector's avarice. This curator, whoever they were, was a master. Their dedication was terrifying, their resources seemingly limitless, their ethics non-existent. Some of these items, particularly the human remains and potentially illicit ritual objects, were far beyond what was legal or obtainable through normal channels. But as I moved deeper into the suite, past an archway draped in heavy velvet curtains leading towards what I assumed were bedrooms, a different feeling began to creep back in. The silence, which had initially felt reverent, now felt watchful. Heavy. I kept getting the distinct, prickling sensation of being observed. I'd pause, listen intently. Nothing but the faint hum of electricity, perhaps from the spotlights, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I dismissed it. Old buildings, paranoia, the nature of the exhibits, it was expected. I paused before a display case containing incredibly realistic anatomical models, cross-sections of human heads, detailed replicas of eyes, hands crafted from wax with visible musculature. One hand, posed as if reaching, caught my eye. The detail was phenomenal. The skin texture, the fingernails, it looked disturbingly real. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass slightly. Did a knuckle just twitch? No. Impossible. A trick of the light, a vibration from my own movement. I shook my head, moving on. Then I heard it. A faint sound, almost too low to register. A soft, wet sigh. It seemed to come from the direction of the Victorian operating theater diorama. I froze, straining my ears. Silence. Just the hum. Must have been the building settling, pipes groaning. Old places make noises. Still, I couldn't shake the image of the wax patient on the table, its chest gaping open. I found myself drawn back to the taxidermy section, specifically to a large glass enclosure housing what the label described as Noxua strigiformes artificia, essentially a massive owl, but with additional, smaller wings grafted onto its back and legs made from articulated surgical steel. Its glass eyes seemed unnervingly focused. As I raised my camera, I could have sworn, absolutely sworn, that its head tilted just a fraction of an inch, tracking my movement. My hand jerked, the photo blurring. "Okay, Marcus, get a grip," I muttered under my breath, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet room. It's theatrical. It's meant to be unsettling. Maybe some exhibits were automated. Animatronics to enhance the living museum theme. That would explain movement, maybe even sounds. It was plausible. The curator seemed capable of anything. Trying to rationalize, I moved towards a corner dominated by a tall, slender figure draped in decaying black robes, standing perfectly still. It looked like a morbid mannequin, perhaps meant to represent the curator themselves or death incarnate. Its head was bowed, face hidden in shadow. Intrigued, I reached out, my fingers hovering just inches from the coarse fabric of the robe. It looked like old sackcloth, but felt strangely coarse, yes, but also subtly yielding, almost like hair. Then, beneath the sound of my own breathing, I heard another noise. Faint, rather soft, wet, thump, thump. Slow but steady. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't the building. It sounded organic, it sounded like a heartbeat, and it was coming from inside the robe figure. My blood ran cold. I snatched my hand back as if burned. staring at the unmoving figure. The dim light suddenly felt menacing, the silence suffocating. The meticulous order of the room, the gleaming cases, the polished floors, it all seemed like a carefully constructed trap. My collector's fascination evaporated, replaced by a primal, sickening dread. I slowly backed away, eyes locked on the robed figure. The rhythmic thump continued, undeniable now that I'd focused on it. My gaze darted around the room, re-evaluating everything I'd seen. The wax figures in the diorama were their chests rising and falling ever so slightly. The reaching hand in the display case was the skin faintly flushed, warm-looking. The owl were those glass eyes blinking. The description from the listing echoed in my mind, living museum of the macabre. I had assumed it was metaphorical, creative license, hyperbole. Standing there, heart pounding, the faint, sickeningly organic sounds seeming to emanate not just from the figure but from the very walls around me, a horrifying realization began to dawn. Some of the exhibits were inanimate, and I was locked inside with them. The thump echoed in the suddenly cavernous silence of the suite, a grotesque counterpoint to the frantic hammering in my own chest. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the building. It was the sound of life, slow and labored, emanating from the core of that black-robed effigy. My mind scrambled, trying to impose logic on the impossible animatronic, some incredibly sophisticated bio-mechanical simulation. But the sound was too wet, too organic, too real. Panic seized me, cold and absolute, the collector's thrill, the academic curiosity, all vaporized, leaving only raw, primal fear. I needed to leave. Now I stumbled backward, tripping over an antique rug, catching myself before I fell, my eyes never leaving the robed figure. Did its head lift slightly as I moved? Did the shadows beneath its cowl deepen? My gaze darted wildly around the room, and now, viewed through the lens of terror, everything looked different, malevolent. The wax figures in the operating theater diorama, their eyes seemed to gleam with a wetness wax shouldn't have. The patient's chest, was it rising and falling in time with that awful, slow heartbeat I now heard echoing faintly from other parts of the room as well? The articulated hand in the display case seemed to curl its fingers almost imperceptibly. The multi-winged owl shifted its weight on its perch, its steel talons scraping faintly against the wood. A low clicking sound started up from the cabinet of wet specimens, like Chetan tapping against glass from the inside living museum. Oh God, it wasn't a metaphor. The curator hadn't just collected objects related to death and the macabre, they had collected life, or some horrifying facsimile of it, preserved, reanimated. Trapped were these failed experiments, unwilling participants. The ambiguity was perhaps the most terrifying part. These weren't just exhibits, they were prisoners displayed in a perpetual state of unnatural existence, and I was locked in here with them. No way. The whisper escaped my lips, hoarse and thin. I turned, abandoning all pretense of composure, and bolted for the intricately carved door. My camera, forgotten, slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the polished floor. I didn't care. All that mattered was the heavy brass key clutched tight in my sweaty palm. Reaching the door, I fumbled with the lock, jamming the key in. It wouldn't turn. Panic flared hotter. No, come on! I jiggled it frantically. Had it locked automatically behind me? Was it malfunctioning? Or was something preventing it from opening? A shuffling sound came from behind me. Slow, deliberate, the sound of heavy fabric dragging across the floor. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The robed figure was moving. It hadn't moved far, perhaps only a few feet from its original position, but it was undeniably closer. Its head was slightly raised now, though the face remained hidden in impenetrable shadow. It didn't move quickly, just a slow, inexorable glide, like a nightmare figure testing the boundaries of reality. The slow thump of its heart seemed louder now, more insistent. Terror gave me a surge of adrenaline. I slammed my shoulder against the door, rattling the frame, while simultaneously twisting the key with all my might. With a horrible screech of protesting metal, the lock finally gave way. I yanked the door open, stumbling backward into the dim, dusty hallway of the main building. I didn't pause. I slammed the carved door shut. Did I hear a faint, breathy sigh from within as it closed, and sprinted for the stairs. The descent was treacherous, taken 2 or 3 steps at a time, my feet slipping on the worn wood, my breath tearing in ragged gasps. The oppressive silence of the building seemed to press in on me, but now it felt different, not empty but charged, as if the entire structure was holding its breath, watching me flee. The strange chemical and decay smell seemed to cling to my clothes, my skin. I half fell down the last few steps and scrambled towards the heavy front door. My hands slick with sweat, fumbled with the sleek modern latch of the smart lock. Thank God it only locked from the outside. It clicked open. I threw my weight against the ancient wood, bursting out into the cool, gray air of the street outside. I didn't stop running. I ran blindly down the block, past the pawn shop and the boarded-up laundromat, gasping for air. The horrifying sounds and images from the suit seared into my brain. The thump, the clicking glass, the tilt of the owl's head, the shuffling robe. Only when I was several blocks away, leaning against a cold brick wall in an unfamiliar alley, my lungs burning, did I dare to stop. The city sounds, distant sirens, traffic, muffled voices were the most beautiful things I had ever heard. They were normal. Say, I looked back in the direction I'd come. The building wasn't visible from here, had it been real. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaking, nauseous. My camera was gone, proof left behind on that gleaming, horrible floor. No one would ever believe me, an AirBNB from an encrypted site, a living museum of horrors. They'd call me crazy. Maybe I was. I checked my pockets reflexively. Burner phone, wallet, and the key, the heavy ornate brass key to apartment 3B, was still clutched in my hand, its metal cool against my skin now. I should have thrown it away, dropped it in my panic. But some part of me, the collector part, perhaps hadn't let go. I eventually found my way back to civilization, caught a cab, went straight to the airport, and booked the first flight home, throwing the burner phone into a trash can along the way. I didn't sleep for days. Every creak of my own apartment building, every shadow in the corner of my eye sent jolts of fear through me. My own collection, once a source of thrilling fascination, now felt inert, lifeless. Almost disappointing, but also safer. So much safer. I tried to forget. I threw myself into my legitimate business, avoided the dark corners of the web, declined invitations from fellow collectors. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The memory of that slow, wet heartbeat, the sensation of being watched by things that shouldn't be watching. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the brass key. It feels cold, heavy, a tangible link to that impossible place. A morbid part of me, the part that led me there in the first place, wonders what's happening in the collector's suite right now. Is the robed figure still shuffling across the floor? Are the wax figures still breathing their shallow breaths? Is the owl watching the door? A few weeks ago, curiosity or perhaps madness drove me to access the encrypted site again, just to see if the listing was still there. It wasn't. But there was a new one, under experiences, titled simply, Persistent Curator Position Available. The description was brief, seeking dedicated individual for permanent, immersive role within a unique private collection. Hands-on duties required. Discretion essential. Apply within. I closed the browser immediately, my hand shaking. I still have the key. I don't know why I keep it. Maybe as a warning. Maybe as an invitation. Maybe because deep down, the collector in me knows the most unique pieces are the ones that cost you everything. And sometimes the collection isn't just something you own. Sometimes it owns you. My name is Sofia Alvarez, or at least it was. Names like addresses and bank accounts become liabilities when you need to truly vanish. And I needed to vanish like smoke in a hurricane, leaving not even a lingering scent behind. You don't end up scrolling through the shadowed corners of the dark web looking for short-term, untraceable housing unless your reasons are painted in shades of desperation and fear. Mine were drenched in them. It wasn't something simple, like skipping bail or dodging debt collectors. This was heavier, the kind of weight that crushes you slowly if you stay still. I'd seen something I shouldn't have, overheard whispers that were meant to remain unheard, connecting dots that formed a picture so ugly, so dangerous, that knowing it existed put a target on my back visible from miles away. These weren't people who sent polite cease and desist letters. They were the kind who specialized in making problems and the people attached to them disappear permanently and without a trace. My only advantage was that they didn't know exactly what I knew or that I was the one who knew it. Yet. But paranoia was a cold, constant companion whispering that discovery was inevitable. Every unfamiliar car felt like surveillance, every wrong number a potential probe. Staying in my life, my routine was suicide by slow increments. My escape plan was crude, born of panic more than precision. Ditch the phone, drain the accounts in small, untraceable increments, cut ties silently, and melt away. The hardest part was finding somewhere to go. Hotels required ID, credit cards, security cameras, friends or family. Out of the question, that would just paint a bigger target on them, drag them into the undertow with me. I needed anonymity. Complete, utter, soul-crushing anonymity. That's when Alex came through. Alex wasn't a friend, not really. More like a contact. A ghost in the digital machine I'd interacted with years ago on some fringe forum discussing things best left undiscussed. A favor owed, a marker called in. I reached out through encrypted channels, vague about my needs, heavy on the urgency. Alex, true to their spectral nature, responded with nothing more than a string of characters and onion link. No questions, no warnings, just the digital key to a door I probably shouldn't open. Accessing the site was like wading through digital sludge. Tor browser churning relays bouncing my signal across the globe. The landing page was stark black background, minimalist white text. No branding, no welcoming graphics. It called itself Haven Null, and its tagline, if you could call it that, was simply temporary oblivion. Absolute discretion. The listings weren't like AirBNB with cheerful photos and host bios. They were clinical. ID numbers instead of names, basic specs, square footage, city quadrant, never a specific address until booking confirmation. duration limits, and a price in Monero that made my stomach clench. Photos, when available, were grainy, low light, showcasing Spartan rooms devoid of personality. It felt less like browse vacation rentals and more like selecting a sterile holding cell. I filtered by immediate availability and maximum privacy protocol. One listing caught my eye: Fanke's location, major U.S. city, West Quadrant. Duration 1 week minimum to 4 weeks maximum. Specs 1 bed, 1 bath, basic kitchenette. Photos showed a small, impeccably clean apartment. White walls, gray synthetic flooring, functional but uncomfortable looking furniture, a small sofa, a metal frame bed, a tiny Formica dining table with 2 chairs. It looked like a model unit that had been stripped of anything remotely humanizing. Sterile, forgettable. Perfect. The description was brief. Unit H734. Secure access. No host interaction required. Guaranteed off network. Payment confirms entry protocol. The price for 1 week was steep, payable only in XMR, but it felt like the only viable option. Using a Tumblr service I barely understood, I sent the crypto, my heart pounding with each confirmation block. Within minutes, a new encrypted message arrived. It contained a city, Los Angeles, a rough district known for its anonymity and transient population, and precise instructions. Proceed to E intersection name at 23 to PST on Estati. A black sit-in license plate ending 7XQ will idle near the northeast corner. Enter the rear passenger side. Do not speak to the driver. You will be taken to the vicinity. Final access code and unit number will be provided digitally upon proximity. It felt like something out of a spy thriller, ridiculously cloak and dagger. But the fear gnawing at me overshadowed the absurdity. That night, clutching a single duffel bag containing essentials and burner tech, I followed the instructions. The black sedan was there, engine humming quietly, windows tinted darker than a starless night. The back door clicked open as I approached. The driver was a silhouette, face hidden by shadow and a low-brimmed cap. True to the instructions, I said nothing, sliding onto the cold leather seat. The door clicked shut, and we pulled away smoothly. The drive was maybe 20 minutes, winding through anonymous streets, each turn further disorienting me. My burner phone, clutched in my sweaty palm, remained dark. Then it buzzed. A new message. Unit 4B access code. 8 or 86. If simultaneously, the car slowed, pulling over on a nondescript street lined with identical, soulless apartment blocks built sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. Exit here, the driver said, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. It was the first and only time he spoke. I scrambled out, bag in hand. The sedan pulled away instantly, disappearing around the corner before I could even fully register my surroundings. Streetlights cast pools of sickly orange light on empty sidewalks. No pedestrians, no other cars. Just rows of silent windows. I located Building C, slipped through the unsecured main entrance, and found the elevator. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of disinfectant and desperation. Apartment 4B looked exactly like every other door in the long, featureless hallway. I punched in 8.86, found the keypad next to the door. A green light flashed, and I heard a distinct thump as the lock disengaged. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside, quickly shutting and locking it behind me. The apartment mirrored the photos precisely. Clean to the point of being unnerving, the air was still, cool, and filtered. No dust motes danced in the beam of light from the single window, which looked out onto a brick wall of the adjacent building, maybe 10 feet away. Minimalist furniture, check. Gray flooring, white walls, check. Kitchenette with a small fridge, a microwave, and an induction hotplate, check. The bathroom was equally sterile, white tiles, basic fixtures, a small stack of thin white towels. There were no decorations. No pictures, no books, no stray objects suggesting prior occupancy. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set, waiting for an actor who never arrived. Or perhaps one who had just left in a hurry. On the wall opposite the kitchenette hung a simple, large print digital calendar. Black numbers on a white background. It displayed the current date, my arrival date. Below it, the time. Dropped my bag and did a quick, thorough sweep. No obvious cameras, no microphones I could spot. The Wi-Fi signal was strong, paradoxically named Gust Network Secure, requiring no password. My burner laptop connected instantly. Basic browse worked, but any attempt to access location services, social media, or even most mainstream news sites resulted in a connection timed out error. It was internet access, but curated, controlled. Enough to feel connected, not enough to reach out or be traced. Relief warred with a persistent low hum of anxiety. This was it, my hiding place. Sterile, anonymous, untraceable. I unpacked my few clothes into the small closet, plugged in my burner phone, still no signal bars, and sat on the edge of the uncomfortable sofa. The silence was absolute. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no city sounds penetrated these walls. It was the silence of a void. My booking was for 1 week. 7 days to breathe, to think, to figure out my next move, if there even was one. 7 days off the grid. I looked at digital calendar on the wall, confirming the date. 7 days felt like an eternity, and yet terrifyingly short. I ate a protein bar from my bag, drank lukewarm water from the tap, and tried to push down the feeling that the sterile cleanliness of the apartment wasn't welcoming but watchful. That night, sleep was fitful. punctuated by dreams of empty hallways and doors that wouldn't open. But I woke up, the apartment was the same. The calendar showed the next day. It was working, I was hidden for now. The first few days passed in a blur of monotony and tension. Wake up, check the locks, check the internet, still restricted, pace, eat, try to plan, fail to plan, stare out the window at the brick wall, check the calendar, sleep. The sterility began to feel oppressive, the silence deafening. But it was safe, or so I thought. Day 6 arrived. Tomorrow I was scheduled to leave. Where I would go I still had no idea, but the thought of being back out, even in the dangerous uncertainty, felt like a release. I packed my meager belongings back into the duffel bag, ready for an early departure. Just one more night in this silent, sterile box. I checked the calendar one last time before attempting sleep. Day 6, departure tomorrow. A sliver of hope. I woke before the non-existent dawn, jolted from a restless sleep by the sheer force of my own anxiety. Today was day 7, departure day. The thought was a jumbled mess of relief and trepidation. Relief at the prospect of leaving this sterile, silent box. Trepidation about stepping back into a world where unseen threats lingered. But anything felt better than the oppressive quiet of Unit 4B. I swung my legs off the uncomfortably firm mattress. The gray synthetic floor cooled beneath my bare feet. My single duffel bag sat packed and ready by the door, a small tangible symbol of imminent freedom. I didn't bother with the kitchenette. My stomach was a knot of nerves, and the remaining protein bars in my bag felt like emergency rations for the unknown journey ahead. I splashed cold water on my face in the equally sterile bathroom, avoiding my own reflection in the mirror. The person staring back looked haunted, eyes wide, shadows deepening beneath them. I just needed to get out. Grabbing the duffel bag, the strap digging into my shoulder, I walked a few steps to the front door. It looked exactly as it had every other day, plain, solid, with a small digital keypad beside it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached out, my hand slightly trembling, and punched in the access code 8086. The code that had let me in. Logically, it should let me out. The keypad beeped with each number pressed, emitting its usual electronic tone. The small green light flashed once, acknowledging the input, but the satisfying thump of the lock disengaging didn't follow. There was only silence. Confused, I tried again. 8086 beep, 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 green, flash silence.
No, I whispered.
The sound loud in the stillness. I grabbed the handle, a simple cold metal lever, and pushed down. It moved, but the door itself didn't budge. It felt like trying to open a solid wall. I rattled the handle frantically, putting my shoulder into the door, pushing with all my might. Nothing. It was completely, utterly immovable. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my mind. Okay, calm down, Sophia, I muttered, forcing myself to take a shaky breath. Maybe the code changed for exit, but the instructions hadn't mentioned that. Maybe the battery in the keypad died, but it was still lighting up. I examined the door frame, running my fingers along the edges. It was seamless, metal fused to metal, or set so precisely into the wall there was no discernible gap. No hinges were visible on the inside. It was built like a vault door, designed for entry, but perhaps not for exit. I pressed my ear against the cool metal, straining to hear anything from the hallway footsteps, elevator dings, muffled voices, nothing. Absolute silence. It was as if the apartment wasn't just soundproofed, but existed in a pocket dimension devoid of external reality. My breathing grew ragged. Okay, the door's jammed. There's always another way. The window. I rushed over to the single window, the one that offered the inspiring view of a grime-streaked brick wall. I'd noted before that there was no latch, no visible mechanism to open it. Now I looked closer. The glass was thick, unnaturally clear despite the dim light filtering through. It was sealed directly into the frame, again with no visible seam or gasket. I pressed my palms against it, cool, unyielding. I pushed harder. Nothing. It didn't rattle, didn't vibrate. It felt less like glass and more like a slab of polished obsidian. Desperation clawed at my throat. I balled my fist and struck the center of the pane. Pain shot up my arm, but the window remained immaculate, unmarred. Not even a vibration. No, I screamed, the sound swallowed by the room's dead air. I looked around wildly. The chair by the formica table, metal legs, flimsy plastic seat. Useless. My duffel bag. Too soft. I grabbed the chair anyway, hefting its surprising weight, and swung it clumsily at the window. The plastic back connected with a dull thud, leaving no mark. The metal legs scraped harmlessly against the surface. It was like hitting solid rock, unbreakable. The prompt's description echoed in my mind, now sounding less like a feature and more like a sentence. Frantic now, I started searching the apartment again, not with the methodical sweep of my arrival, but with the desperate energy of a trapped animal. I ran my hands along the walls, pushing, tapping, looking for hidden panels, secret doors. Nothing but smooth, cold plaster. I checked the vents near the ceiling, small metal grates, screwed tightly into place with non-standard screw heads I couldn't possibly turn. Even if I could, they were barely large enough for a rat to squeeze through. The kitchenette, I pulled out the small fridge, checked behind the microwave. Just wall. The bathroom, checked behind the mirror, tapped the tiles. Solid. Every potential exit was a dead end. Every surface mocked me with its smooth, seamless impenetrability. My burner phone. I snatched it from my bears. Not one flicker. It was a useless brick. The laptop, I flipped it open. The Gusta network secure was still active. I opened the browser, desperately typing in URLs for emergency services, news outlets, anything that might have slipped through the filter. Connection timed out. Unable to establish secure connection. Access denied. The internet was a curated illusion, a window that only looked inward. I was digitally gagged, electronically isolated. Pacing back and forth across the small living area, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the synthetic flooring. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any clue, any anomaly I might have missed. And then they landed on the digital calendar hanging on the wall. The black numbers were large, clear, unavoidable. I froze mid-stride. My blood ran cold. It wasn't day 7, it wasn't my departure date. Displayed in stark, emotionless digits was my arrival date. The date from 7 days ago. Day 1, the air left my lungs in a whoosh, as if I'd been punched. Disbelief warred with a dawning, sickening horror. The jammed door. The unbreakable window. The sterile, unchanging environment. And now this. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a malfunction. This apartment wasn't just a physical prison, it was something else. Something unnatural. Something that didn't adhere to the normal flow of time. No, this isn't happening. I stammered, backing away from the calendar as if it were radioactive. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, praying it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, a symptom of stress. But the date remained stubbornly fixed. Day 1. My carefully constructed composure shattered. A raw scream tore from my throat, bouncing off the hard surfaces, achieving nothing. I lunged at the calendar, trying to rip it from the wall. It was secured flush, no edges to grab, no visible power cord. It felt like part of the wall itself. I beat against its surface with my fists until my knuckles were raw, but the display didn't flicker, the numbers didn't change. Defeated, I slid down the wall, landing hard on the floor, hot tears blurring my vision. Trapped. Not just locked in, but locked in time. The booking wasn't just for a week, it seemed the week itself was the trap, destined to repeat endlessly. How long had I truly been here? Was this the first time the week had reset? Or had I already lived through this departure day, this panic, this dawning horror, countless times before, my memory wiped clean with each cycle? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. After the initial wave of terror subsided, a desperate, fragile rationality tried to assert itself. I needed proof. I needed to track it. I stood up on shaky legs, went into the bathroom, and rummaged through my meager toiletries. I found a dark eyebrow pencil. Returning to the main room, I went to the wall near the calendar and drew a distinct line, pressing hard. Day 1, mark 1. If this day repeated, if the calendar reset again tomorrow morning, would the mark still be there? The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. I didn't unpack. I barely moved from the sofa, just stared at the door, the window, the calendar. I noticed small things I hadn't before. The single towel I'd used that morning was gone from the bathroom floor, replaced by a fresh, neatly folded stack. The protein bar wrapper I'd left on the kitchenette counter had vanished. The apartment wasn't just resetting the date, it was resetting itself, erasing any sign of my passage, meticulously maintaining its sterile perfection. As the light outside the window, judging by the slight change in luminance on the brick wall, began to fade, signaling the approach of night, a new terror took hold. Would I fall asleep? Would sleep trigger the reset? Or would I be forced to stay awake, watching the clock tick over, watching the date remain stubbornly fixed, or worse, witnessing the impossible moment it flipped back yet again? The silence pressed in, heavier than ever, no longer just quiet, but watchful, patient, eternal. I huddled on the sofa, eyes fixed on the damning numbers of the calendar, waiting for a tomorrow that would only bring yesterday. The line I'd drawn on the wall felt like a pathetic act of defiance against an incomprehensible force. Would it even be there when I opened my eyes again? I don't know if I slept. Maybe I passed out from sheer exhaustion and terror, huddled on that sterile sofa. Or maybe time simply skipped, jumping its track like a scratched record. All I know is one moment I was staring at the hateful black numbers of the calendar, the faint line I'd drawn on the wall, a pathetic beacon of hope beside it, and the next awareness returned like a slow tide. The first thing I did, before even fully processing the stale air or the unchanging gray light filtering past the brick wall, was look at the wall. The mark was gone. Not faded, not smudged. As if the eyebrow pencil had never touched the plaster. The wall was pristine, smooth, mocking my futile attempt to leave a trace. My stomach plummeted. I scrambled over to the calendar, already knowing what I would see. Day 1. Arrival day. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been a stress-induced hallucination. It was real. The loop was real. The next few cycles are a blur in my memory, a horrifying montage of repeated actions and inevitable failures. I tried everything my panic-stricken mind could conceive. I stayed awake for what felt like the entire 24-hour period, forcing my eyes open with sheer willpower, watching the digital clock beneath the date tick toward night 23:58:23:59. And then I'd blink, find myself slumped against the wall or back on the sofa, the clock reading 0700, the date stubbornly mocking me day one. There was no witnessing the transition. It simply happened, seamlessly erasing the passage of time, resetting my consciousness along with the environment. I tried preemptive strikes. I gathered the flimsy chair, ready to smash it into the calendar precisely at midnight. I woke up with the chair back neatly tucked under the formica table. I tried barricading the door from the inside, wedging the sofa against it, pointlessly hoping to jam it against whatever mechanism reset it. I woke up with the sofa back in its designated spot, not a scuff mark on the floor. The apartment didn't just reset, it tidied up. Then there were the resources. I realized quickly I wasn't going to starve or die of thirst. The small fridge, which I'd initially ignored after finishing my own meager supplies, began to replenish. One cycle, I opened it to find 3 identical, vacuum-sealed packs of a bland beige nutrient paste. No brand name, no ingredients list, just sustenance. When I finished them, 3 more would appear after the next reset. The tap in the bathroom sink always produced clear, odorless, tasteless water. The electricity never flickered. The thin white towels reappeared, folded. The single roll of toilet paper never seemed to deplete. This wasn't a prison where I'd waste away. It was worse. It was a cage designed for indefinite occupancy. The apartment itself was keeping me alive, sustaining the loop, feeding its captive. The sheer tantalus, like cruelty of it providing life but denying living, was a layer of psychological torture I hadn't anticipated. Where did it come from? Who refilled the fridge? Was someone entering while I was unconscious during the reset? Or was it something even more impossible, the apartment itself generating sustenance from nothing? I preferred not to dwell on it. The endless repetition, the absolute isolation, began to erode me from the inside out. My memories of the before times started to fray at the edges. Why was I running? The faces of the men I'd overheard, the specifics of the danger, they became hazy, like trying to recall a dream moments after waking. Sometimes I'd clutch my head, trying to force the memories back into focus, terrified of losing the reason I was here. If I forgot why I needed to hide, what was left of Sofia Alvarez? My perception warped. In the oppressive silence, my own mind began to fill the void. I'd catch fleeting movements in the corner of my eye, shadows that danced and vanished when I turned to look. Was it just exhaustion, or was something else here, flickering at the edge of visibility? Whispers seemed to echo just beyond the range of hearing, faint, sibilant sounds like dry leaves skittering, or perhaps fragmented voices too low to decipher. Sometimes a low, mechanical hum vibrated through the floor, lasting only a few seconds before fading. Was it the building's machinery, or the sound of the cage adjusting itself? My behavior became erratic. Some cycles I'd fall into a rigid routine, wake up, consume the paste, perform frantic exercises until exhausted, pace endlessly, check the door, check the window, stare at the calendar, wait for the reset. Other cycles I'd succumb to apathy, lying on the bed or sofa for hours, barely moving, letting the sterile silence wash over me, almost welcoming the blankness. I started talking to myself, first narrating my actions, then holding full conversations, arguing points, trying to convince myself there was a way out, knowing I was lying. Were there others? Sometimes thought so. One cycle I found a small mother-of-pearl button near the sofa. Definitely not mine. I clutched it like a holy relic, proof of another presence. After the next reset, it was gone. Another time, faint scratches appeared near the bottom of the main door, low down, like a small animal or a child had tried to claw their way out. They vanished with the next dawn. Were these echoes of past prisoners, fellow occupants trapped in their own loops, or just more tricks conjured by the apartment or my own fracturing mind? The theories churned endlessly. Was this place a glitch in reality, a pocket dimension created by have and null? Was the dark web entity not just a broker but the jailer? Or was it older, something ancient that had latched onto this anonymous building? Was I part of some cruel experiment testing the limits of human endurance? The not knowing was an acid bath for the soul. In one cycle, fueled by a surge of rage and despair, I decided on a final, desperate act. I went into the bathroom, blocked the drain in the small shower stall with a wadded towel, and turned the water on full blast. I turned on the sink too. My plan was vague: flood the place, cause damage, short something out, change something. The water pooled quickly, rising over my ankles. It reached the lip of the shower basin and then stopped rising. The drains, despite being visibly blocked, were somehow keeping pace. The water level held steady, refusing to spill over. I left it running, walked back into the main room, and tried to start a fire. I shredded toilet paper, tried to create sparks by striking the metal chair leg against the concrete floor revealed under a peeled back corner of the synthetic flooring. I'd managed to rip up nothing. Not even a spark. It was as if the laws of physics themselves were selectively enforced within these walls. I don't know how many cycles have passed, weeks, months, years. Time has lost all meaning. The concept of day 7 is a distant, almost mythical concept. There is only arrival day over and over. The fight has mostly gone out of me now. The rage has cooled to a dull, aching dread. The panic is a low, constant hum beneath the surface. Sometimes I try to remember my name, Sofia Alvarez. It sounds foreign, like a character in a book I once read. The reasons for my flight are now shadows, intangible and distant. What matters is the sterile white walls, the gray floor, the brick wall outside the unbreakable window, the humming silence, and the calendar. Always the calendar. Day 1, I found my burner laptop in the bag during one of the morning resets. Its battery is inexplicably full. The curated internet connection is still active. I'm typing this now. Why? I don't know. A message in a bottle thrown into a digital ocean that probably leads nowhere. A final act of defining myself before I dissolve completely into the beige routine of this place. Maybe some echo of this will persist. Maybe the loop isn't perfect. Maybe somewhere, somehow this warning will slip through the cracks of Heaven Knows sterile prison. Or maybe it's just another part of the cycle. Maybe I do this every few hundred resets. Maybe the jailer enjoys reading my despair. The light filtering past the brick wall is beginning to fade again. Another arrival day draws to a close. Soon the reset will come. I should feel terror. I should feel rage. But mostly I just feel tired. So incredibly tired. The calendar glows softly in the dimming room. Day 1, tomorrow will be arrival day. My name is Chloe Jensen, and if you're reading this, maybe it'll serve as a warning. Or maybe you're just looking for a cheap thrill, a spooky story to tell your friends. I wish it was just a story for me. But this is real. It happened. And it started, like so many desperate decisions, with money. Or rather, the distinct lack of it. I was halfway through my literature degree, staring down the barrel of a summer semester I desperately needed to take to stay on track. Usually, summer meant heading home, working a mind-numbing retail job, and saving every penny. But a required course only offered this summer threw a wrench in those plans. My financial aid package had hit a snag, some bureaucratic nonsense about a missing form, and suddenly, the already expensive campus housing became an impossibility. The dorms were full anyway, snapped up by students quicker and richer than me. So began the frantic scramble for affordable off-campus housing near the university. Affordable in this college town was a relative term, usually meaning slightly less than extortionate. Craigslist was my first stop, a digital swamp of blurry photos, suspiciously enthusiastic descriptions, and potential roommates who ranged from mildly eccentric to definitely wearing an ankle monitor creepy. I answered ads, went to depressing viewings in cramped apartments that smelled vaguely of stale beer and regret, and dodged questions that felt far too personal. Nothing panned out. Everything remotely decent was snapped up within hours, or required 3 months rent up front plus a deposit that equaled the GDP of a small nation. My meager savings wouldn't cover it. Panic started to set in, cold and sharp. It was during a late-night doom scrolling session fueled by cheap coffee and anxiety that I remembered something a guy in my Comp C class had mentioned offhand. A rumor, really, about hidden corners of the internet, the so-called dark web, where you could find things. Not just the illegal stuff everyone whispers about, but other listings, forums for niche communities, and apparently, sometimes, incredibly cheap housing arrangements offered by people who preferred anonymity. The idea initially repulsed me. The dark web, wasn't that where criminals hung out? But desperation is a powerful motivator. The clock was ticking. Classes started in less than 2 weeks. Where else was I going to look? With a deep breath and a muttered apology to my laptop's firewall, I downloaded the necessary browser, followed some obscure instructions found on a surface web forum, and took the plunge. Navigating that space felt like wading through digital sludge. Links died, pages timed out, and everything had a vaguely unsettling, anonymous feel. I almost gave up multiple times, convinced I was either going to get hacked or inadvertently order something highly illegal. Then, buried deep within a forum titled something innocuous, like Alternative Living Solutions, I found it.
A subsection called Hidden Hearths.
And within that, a listing. Room available for quiet student. Historic property near university campus, furnished. Utilities included, extremely competitive rent. No pictures of the exterior, just 3 reasonably clear shots of a bedroom. It looked old-fashioned, but large and clean. A 4-poster bed, a solid-looking wooden desk and armchair, a patterned rug. The description was brief, almost terse. The host listed was simply, Mr. Abernathy. But the price.
Oh God, the price.
It wasn't just competitive, it was practically free. Less than a quarter of what even the dingy studio apartment was asking. Every rational alarm bell in my head was screaming, Scam! Dangier! Go tour! But the desperation, the vision of sleeping in my car or dropping out of the semester drowned them out. I pictured myself in that room at that desk studying, close to campus, saving money. Maybe Mr. Abernathy was just an eccentric old man, wanting some company or help around the house, though the ad didn't mention any duties. Maybe he didn't understand current market rates. Maybe it was legitimate. I sent a cautious inquiry using the encrypted email provided. The reply came within an hour. Perfect grammar, polite but distant tone. Abernathy confirmed the room was still available and stated his preference for quiet, studious tenants. He asked for no references, no background check, just confirmation I was a student and would respect the house rules. We exchanged a few more brief messages. He gave me the address and told me the key would be hidden under a loose brick by the front gate on my arrival day. No meeting beforehand, no phone call. Just digital text. Another crimson flag flapping violently in the breeze of my willful ignorance. I confirmed I'd take it. The day I moved in, the Uber driver gave the house a wide-eyed look as he pulled up. I couldn't blame him. Historic property was an understatement. It was a looming Victorian behemoth, all gray stone, sharp gables, and darkened windows that looked like vacant eyes. Ivy crawled possessively up one side, and a couple of stone gargoyles perched on the roofline, seemingly sneering down at the street. The wrought iron fence was ornate but rusting, and the garden was a tangle of overgrown bushes and shadowy trees. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, the kind where the heroine definitely doesn't make it to the end credits. My stomach churned. "Are you sure this is it?" the driver asked, probably hoping I'd say no. "Yeah," I mumbled, grabbing my duffel bag and backpack, my only luggage for now. "This is it." He didn't linger. I found the loose brick easily enough, and beneath it an old, heavy brass key. The gate creaked open like a moan. Walking up the cracked flagstone path, I felt an oppressive silence descend. No birds sang, no traffic noise reached here. It felt preserved, waiting. The heavy oak front door opened on a grand but gloomy foyer. Dark wood paneling, a sweeping staircase disappearing into the upper shadows, and the pervasive scent of dust, old paper, and something cloyingly sweet like decaying flowers. No lights were on, save for the weak afternoon sun filtering through a grimy stained glass window high above. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the marble floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and thin. "Mr. Abernathy." Silence answered. Thick, heavy, absolute silence. Following the emailed instructions, I climbed the creaking stairs, my hand trailing on the dusty carved banister. The second floor hallway was long, carpeted in a faded runner that muffled my steps. Doors lined both sides, all closed. My room was at the very end, as promised. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Pushing the door open, I was surprised. The room matched the pictures exactly. It was large, clean, and meticulously tidy, a stark contrast to the gloom of the foyer. The furniture was antique but well maintained. The bed was made with a crisp white duvet. Someone had even placed a small, sealed plastic container on the desk. It felt strangely impersonal, like a museum exhibit, but infinitely better than the hallway outside. I quickly stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Okay. I was here, it was weird, yes, but the room was fine. Maybe it would all be fine. I spent the next few hours unpacking my meager belongings, trying to make the space feel a little more mine. I texted my mom a vague message about finding a room in a big, shared house near campus, and assured her I was safe. I tried to study, but the silence of the house pressed in. I never heard anyone else, no footsteps, no voices, no TV. Was Mr. Abernathy even here? Were there other roommates? It felt like I was completely alone in the giant, creaking structure. As evening bled into night, the house seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. Around 10 p.m., just as I was contemplating trying to sleep despite my unease, I saw it. A slip of paper being pushed slowly under my door from the hallway side. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, listening. Silence. After a minute, I crept over and picked it up. It wasn't notebook paper. It was thick, expensive-feeling parchment, like an old document. Typed single-spaced were the words house and roommate agreement, addendum B below the title. A list began. I started reading, my blood running cold. It started normally enough. 1. Common areas, kitchen, sitting room to be kept tidy. Please clean up after yourself immediately. 2. Quiet hours are strictly enforced between 10:00 p.m. and 7:00 a.m. Then, it shifted. 3. All personal food items must be stored within the sealed container provided in your room. Consumption of personal food outside your room is discouraged. Under no circumstances should the main kitchen, refrigerator, or pantry be accessed between sunset and sunrise. 4. Ensure your bedroom door is securely locked from the inside between the hours of 11:59 p.m. and 5:00 a.m. Do not open your door during this time for any reason, regardless of sounds perceived. 5. If you must use the hallway lavatory after midnight, do so quickly and quietly. Do not linger. 6. Never acknowledge the man in the hallway after midnight. This is imperative. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak to him or respond if spoken to. Do not react to his presence, appearance, or actions in any way. Pretend he is not there. He is not a resident. 7. Should you hear sustained weeping emanating from the attic access panels located in the upstairs hall ceiling, please increase the volume of any personal audio device or create ambient noise within your room. Do not attempt to investigate the source. 8. Report any unusual or rapid mold, fungal growth on walls or ceilings immediately via email. Do not touch or attempt to clean it yourself. 9. Candles or open flames are strictly prohibited. 10. Adherence to these rules is not optional. Failure to comply will result in the immediate termination of this agreement. I read number 6 again. Never acknowledge the man in the hallway after midnight. He is not a resident. A chill, entirely unrelated to the room's temperature, snaked it down my spine. This wasn't an eccentric landlord. This wasn't a prank. The formality of the typed rules, the specificity, the sheer strangeness. The man in the hallway. What the hell did that mean? Who was he? And why couldn't I acknowledge him? My mind raced trying to rationalize. Sleepwalker. Intruder. Hallucination. But the rule was explicit. Pretend he is not there. I looked at my phone. 10:53 p.m. Midnight was just over an hour away. Suddenly, the silence outside my door didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. I checked the lock on my door, a simple bolt, flimsy looking against the heavy wood. My cheap room suddenly felt like a trap. Leaving felt impossible now. Where would I go this late? But staying meant potentially finding out who the man in the hallway was. And the agreement made it terrifyingly clear that finding out was the last thing I should do. The typed words on the parchment seemed to pulse in time with the frantic hammering in my chest. Never acknowledge the man in the hallway after midnight. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, stark and terrifyingly absolute. My eyes flicked to my phone screen again at 10:58 p.m. 2 minutes. 2 minutes until the witching hour in this house of whispering rules. My first instinct was pure flight. Pack my bag, unlock the door, run down the hall, out the front door, and never look back. But the rational part of my brain, weakened but not entirely silenced, kicked in. Run where? It was pitch black outside. I was in an unfamiliar neighborhood, and I had maybe $50 in my wallet. Where would I sleep? What about my classes? And what if breaking the lease, even this bizarre, unwritten contract lease, had consequences beyond just losing a non-existent deposit? Rule Fate 10 was chillingly vague. Immediate termination of this agreement. Termination by whom? Or what? I scanned the room, eyes darting. The heavy antique wardrobe, too bulky to move easily. The desk, I gave it a shove. It scraped loudly against the wooden floor, protesting, but budged only an inch. No barricading the door felt futile, maybe even provocative. Rule Pine 40 Eve. Ensure your bedroom door is securely locked. Do not open regardless of sounds perceived. It implied listening, waiting, enduring. 11:59 p.m. My breath hitched. I backed away from the door, retreating to the relative safety of the armchair near the window, pulling my knees up to my chest. I turned off the main overhead light, leaving only the small desk lamp on, casting long dancing shadows across the room. Silence, the profound absolute silence of the house pressed in on my ears, amplifying my own heartbeat until it felt like a drum against my ribs. Midnight. Nothing happened. No demonic fanfare, no sudden spectral appearance, just the continued unnerving quiet. A minute passed. 2, 5. Relief began to trickle into my veins, cold and weak. Maybe it was a joke, a ridiculously elaborate, cruel prank aimed at the naive college student renting a suspiciously cheap room off the dark web. Of course it was. Who else would fall for Creek? My head snapped up. The sound was faint, distant, coming from somewhere down the long hallway. A floorboard settling, the old house breathing, or footsteps. I strained my ears, holding my breath again. Another faint creak, perhaps a fraction closer this time. Then silence again. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My bladder screamed in protest, a sharp, urgent ache. Rule 85 swam in my vision. If you must use the hallway lavatory after midnight, do so quickly and quietly. Do not linger. I wouldn't even make it to the damn lavatory. What if he was out there? The man, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on breathing slowly, trying to ignore the physical discomfort. No, I wasn't leaving this room until sunrise. Exhaustion warred with terror. Adrenaline is potent, but it doesn't last forever. My eyelids grew heavy. I must have dozed off in the armchair because I woke with a violent jerk, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something right outside the door. I scanned the room, eyes wide, ears straining. Nothing. Just the low hum of the old wiring, the whisper of wind against the window pane. The desk lamp cast the same long shadows. I checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. Hours had passed. Had I missed something? Had he come and gone? Or had nothing happened at all? I drifted off again into a restless sleep filled with images of endless, dark hallways, closed doors, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Sunrise was a revelation. Pale golden light streamed through the lace curtains, banishing the deepest shadows. 7:05 a.m. Quiet hours were over. The oppressive weight on my chest lifted slightly. I had survived the first night. With trembling hands, I slid the bolt back and cautiously opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty. Sunlight streamed weakly from the window at the far end, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It looked normal. Just an old, slightly dilapidated hallway. No lingering presence, no sign of the nocturnal man. The sheer normalcy was almost disorienting after the night's terror. Maybe my exhaustion and the power of suggestion had created the creaks, the fear. My bladder gave a particularly vicious twinge. Okay, first priority. I forced myself out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Walking down the hallway felt like stepping onto thin ice. Every floorboard seemed to groan under my weight. I passed the other closed doors, wondering who or what might be behind them. Were there other tenants cowering like me? Or was I truly alone with Mr. Abernathy and the man? The bathroom, thankfully, was unoccupied. Old fixtures, cracked tile, but surprisingly clean, much like my room. As I washed my hands, I glanced up. Directly outside the bathroom door, embedded in the ceiling, was a square outline, the attic access panel mentioned in Rule Phase 7. It looked innocuous enough now. No sounds emanated from it. I finished quickly, eagerness to get back behind my locked door overriding any curiosity. Back in my room, the relief was immense. I locked the bolt, leaning against the solid wood. Okay.
Deep breaths.
Rational thought, it was daytime. The rules, while terrifyingly specific, might have mundane explanations. The man in the hallway, maybe an elderly relative of Abernathy's with dementia who wandered at night, and acknowledging him caused distress. The food rule, maybe pest control issues, exacerbated at night. The weeping from the attic, faulty pipes, wind whistling through eaves, the mold. This was an old house. It almost sounded plausible in the bright morning light. Almost. But the cold knot of fear remained in my stomach. The feeling of the house, the sheer intensity of the rules, it didn't feel mundane. I needed supplies. And I had to sort out some registration paperwork on campus. The thought of leaving the relative safety of my locked room was unappealing, but staying cooped up felt like surrendering. Besides, I needed food. Remembering Rule 83, I eyed the strange, sealed plastic container on the desk. It was about the size of a shoebox, opaque white plastic, with heavy-duty clasps and a thick rubber gasket around the lid, like something from a laboratory. Why couldn't food go in the main fridge after sunset? I decided then and there I'd buy mostly non-perishables I could keep safely sealed in this weird box just in case. Better safe than sorry. Before leaving, I decided to take a quick peek downstairs during safe, daylight hours. The foyer was just as gloomy, the air still and heavy. I glanced into the sitting room mentioned in Rule 81. It was like stepping back in time. Heavy velvet curtains blocked most of the light. Dust covers draped over unseen furniture. Portraits hung on the walls, stern-faced men and women from a bygone era, their painted eyes seeming to follow me. An immense cold fireplace dominated one wall. The room felt utterly lifeless, unused for decades. I didn't linger. I didn't dare peek into the kitchen, I just wanted out. Locking the heavy front door behind me felt like escaping a tomb. The bright sunshine and the cheerful noise of students heading towards campus felt jarringly normal. For a few hours, walking under the blue sky, dealing with bureaucratic queues and grabbing a coffee, I almost convinced myself. It was just a creepy old house and a landlord with a penchant for dramatic rules. A prank. I could handle a prank, especially for this rent. I had to handle it. But the feeling evaporated the moment the house came back into view late that afternoon. As dusk began to creep in, the windows seemed to darken, the gargoyles looked more menacing. The dread washed over me again, cold and unwelcome. Inside, the silence felt deeper, more watchful. I hurried upstairs, locking my door immediately. I unpacked my groceries: cereal, protein bars, apples, a small carton of milk. Remembering the sunset rule, I carefully placed the milk and apples inside the strange white container, snapping the heavy clasp shut. It sealed with a faint hiss. As I did, my gaze caught on a spot on the wall near the window, low down near the baseboard. A dark, fuzzy patch, roughly the size of my palm. Had that been there this morning? I leaned closer. It looked like ordinary dark mildew, common in old damp buildings, but it seemed darker than I remembered. And Rule 8 flashed in my mind. Report any unusual or rapid mold fungal growth, do not touch. Rapid. It certainly hadn't been that noticeable 12 hours ago. Unease prickled my skin. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, zoomed in, it just looked like fuzzy black mold. Still, better follow the rules. I composed a brief, formal email to Mr. Abernathy's encrypted address. Noticed possible mold growth near window, approx 4 inches diameter. Image attached. Please advise. C. Jensen, room 7. I hit send. No reply came. Night fell again. Thicker and faster this time, it seemed. 9:00 p.m. I tried to focus on my textbook, highlighting passages with a shaky hand. Every creak of the house outside my door made me jump. 10:00 p.m. Quiet hours began. 11:00 p.m. the silence deepened. Then I heard it. Not a creak this time. A soft, rhythmic shuffling, like someone dragging their feet, slowly, deliberately along the carpet runner in the hall. My heart leaped into my throat. It was closer than the sounds last night, coming from the direction of the stairs heading towards my end of the hall. Shuffle, pause, shuffle closer. My breath caught. The shuffling stopped, right outside my door. Absolute silence for a beat. Then tap, soft, hesitant tap. Right on the wood, inches from my head as I sat frozen at the desk. Rule 94 screamed in my mind, do not open your door, regardless of sounds perceived. My hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. Who was it? Was it him? It wasn't midnight yet, but the rules didn't explicitly say he only appeared after midnight, just that he shouldn't be acknowledged then. The shuffling, it sounded old. Or unwell. Before I could process the tapping further, another sound began. Faint, barely audible at first, filtering down from above, a high-pitched rip. Hic sob, hex sob. It was coming from the ceiling, near where I knew the attic access panel was. Rule Phase 7A. If you hear sustained weeping emanating from the attic, increase the volume of any personal audio device. The weeping grew slightly louder, more desperate. The shuffling sound outside my door started again, moving slowly away back down the hall. 2 rules, seemingly activating at once. My hands shook violently as I grabbed my phone, fumbling to open my music app. I hit shuffle on a random playlist, turning the volume up just enough to obscure the heartbreaking sobs from the attic, but not so loud as to violate quiet hours. The generic pop music felt absurdly incongruous with the chilling sounds it was masking. The weeping continued, a muffled counterpoint to the tinny music. The shuffling faded into the distance. I sat there, rigid, phone clutched in my hand, eyes fixed on the door. The mold, the weeping, the shuffling, the tapping, these weren't pranks. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this house. And midnight was still approaching. The cheap pop music filtering from my phone speakers felt like tissue paper against a hurricane. It did little to calm the frantic storm inside me, only serving to muffle the desperate weeping from the attic. I sat there, huddled in the armchair, watching the clock on my phone tick towards midnight with a morbid fascination. The shuffling outside my door had faded, but the memory of the soft tap lingered, an unanswered question hanging heavy in the air. Who was out there? What did they want? And what was Rule 87 protecting me from by having me drown out those heart-wrenching sobs? Midnight arrived not with a bang, but with a cessation. The weeping from above stopped abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. The house fell back into its deep, watchful silence, broken only by the tinny music still playing from my phone. I didn't dare turn it off. I stayed awake, eyes gritty, every nerve ending raw, jumping at every creak and groan of the ancient structure settling around me. I scanned the sliver of hallway visible under the door, watching for shadows, for movement. Nothing. Either the music and the locked door were enough, or tonight, the man in the hallway was elsewhere. I prayed it was the former, but feared it was the latter, a temporary reprieve, not a solution. Sleep, when it finally claimed me sometime before dawn, was shallow and dreamless, offering no escape. The third morning dawned gray and oppressive. Rain lashed against the window pane, blurring the view of the tangled garden below. The silence in the house felt different today, not empty, but charged, expectant. The weeping hadn't resumed with the sunrise, but the memory of it seemed to cling to the air. I finally turned off the music, the sudden quiet almost deafening. My first glance was towards the wall near the window. The mold patch, it was undeniably larger, spreading outwards in dark, feathery tendrils. It looked thicker, somehow more three-dimensional, like dark velvet clinging to the plaster. Rule Height aids report any unusual or rapid mold fungal growth. I took another picture, the image stark and unsettling on my phone screen. I sent another email to Mr. Abernathy, terser this time, mold growth worsening rapidly. Room 7, still no reply. The isolation felt crushing. No host, no other tenants visible, just me, the creeping mold, and the oppressive rules. A wave of despair washed over me. What was I doing here? This wasn't just eccentric, it was dangerous. The sounds, the rules, the tangible change in the mold, it was all too real. But the thought of leaving, of facing the financial ruin and the failure, warred with the primal instinct to survive. Maybe just one more day, I told myself, unconvincingly. Maybe Abernathy would reply, explain things. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. They steadied, but the small digital clock by the bed reset to flashing zeros. And my laptop, which had been plugged into the wall outlet, was dark. Dead. I checked the cord, the outlet, nothing. The flicker must have tripped a breaker. My stomach plummeted. My textbooks were mostly digital, assignments were online, and my phone battery, I now noticed with horror, was hovering at a precarious 15%. My charger cable was plugged into the same surge protector as the laptop. Without power to that outlet, I was cut off. Panic seized me. I need my laptop. I needed my phone. The breaker box, where would it be in a house this old? Basement, probably. Or a utility closet. Outside my room, it was late afternoon, maybe 4 p.m. Technically not quiet hours, technically not after sunset. Rule 3 only forbade using the kitchen, fridge, and pantry after sunset, not being in the common areas. Rule 4 was about locking the door between midnight and 5 a.m. Rule 6 was about acknowledging the man after midnight. It should be safe. Should be. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and peered out. The hallway was empty, shadows already lengthening in the gray afternoon light. Silence. I moved quickly down the creaking stairs, my sneakers loud on the steps. The foyer felt colder, damper than before. I checked a tall, narrow door tucked under the main staircase, locked tight. I hurried into the sitting room, scanned the walls, nothing. Into the kitchen, it was large, surprisingly modern appliances mixed with ancient cabinetry, but no obvious breaker panel. Then I saw it, another door, tucked away in a corner past the dusty countertops, looking older than the rest. Basement access. A pantry. I hesitated, then turned the tarnished brass knob. It swung open onto darkness and a rush of cool, damp air that smelled strongly of earth and decay. Steep wooden stairs descended into blackness. I couldn't see a thing. My phone's flashlight, battery too low, couldn't risk it. Nope, I muttered, backing away quickly and shutting the door. No way was I venturing down there. Defeated, I trudged back upstairs, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of my neck. The dead laptop and dying phone felt like the walls closing in. Night fell like a shroud. I ate a protein bar in the near darkness, saving my phone's dying battery. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a dripping silence. 10:00 p.m. quiet hours. 11:00 p.m. the house groaned around me. 11:45 p.m. my nerves were stretched taut as piano wire shuffle. Pause a shuffle. It was back. The sound from last night, but slower, heavier, like something immensely wary or heavy was being dragged along the hallway carpet. Closer. It stopped directly outside my door. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I stared at the door, barely breathing. Scry 8, not tapping this time. A dry, deliberate scratching like long fingernails dragging slowly down the wood. Scry 8. It went on for agonizing seconds. My skin crawled. Then, a voice, guttural and possibly old and dry like rustling leaves. It seeped through the thick wood of the door, right into my ear. Little mouse, so quiet in there, locked and tight. Rule phase 6. Never acknowledge cares. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak to him or respond if spoken to. Do not react. Pretend he is not there. My throat closed up. I couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to. The voice was fundamentally wrong, ancient and predatory. Scry ape, near the bottom of the door this time. It's cold out here. In the hall, let me in just for a moment. Warm myself by your lamp. I squeezed my eyes shut, clamping my hands over my ears. I started humming a tuneless, frantic sound, rocking back and forth in the armchair. Don't acknowledge. Don't react. The scratching continued, rasping against the wood, punctuated by the horrifyingly intimate, dry voice. It felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. Then, the scratching stopped. A sound like a long, slow exhalation of dusty air whispered against the bottom of the door. The shuffling resumed, dragging itself slowly away back down the hall until it faded into the oppressive silence once more. I stayed frozen, hands over my ears, humming brokenly, long after the sound stopped. Tears streamed down my face, tears of sheer terror. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. And it was right outside my door. Midnight chimed softly on my phone, its last act before the battery indicator finally went black. The room plunged into complete darkness, save for the faint gray light filtering from the window. Panic flared anew. Alone in the dark, with that potentially still nearby. Suddenly, a tremendous sriracha echoed from the hallway ceiling, much louder than a simple creak. It sounded like structural damage. Dust sifted down visibly in the faint light under my door. It was followed by a sickening, wet tearing sound, and then a heavy, dull etchumpi on the hallway floor. Silence. Utter, profound silence. What the hell was that? Had the attic creature fallen? Had he done something? My mind refused to supply a rational explanation. I didn't move a muscle. I sat there in the dark, rigid with fear, listening until the first hint of gray dawn lightened the window. That was it. No more rationalizing, no more enduring. Forget the money, forget the classes. I had to get out, now. As soon as the sun was properly up, casting weak light into the room, I moved. With trembling hands, I threw my few belongings into my duffel bag, clothes, toiletries, my dead laptop and phone. Everything else could stay. Zipping the bag felt like sealing a coffin lid. Heart pounding, I unlocked the door and pulled it open, ready to bolt. The hallway was empty, but my eyes immediately went to the ceiling. A large section of plaster, easily 3 feet wide, had indeed fallen from around the attic access panel. Directly below it on the faded runner was a dark, wet-looking stain already soaking into the old carpet. It glistened slightly in the morning light, and lying half on the stain, half off it, was a single, worn brown leather slipper. Old-fashioned, like something my grandfather might have worn. I didn't look closer. I didn't want to know what made the stain or who the slipper belonged to. I slung my bag over my shoulder and I ran. Down the hall, my footsteps echoing frantically past the closed doors, down the wide, creaking staircase. I didn't glance into the sitting room or the kitchen. At the front door, the heavy brass lock stuck for a heart-stopping moment. Panic surged, bile rising in my throat. I thought I heard a floorboard creak on the landing above. Don't look back. With a final, desperate wrench, the lock turned. I burst out of the heavy oak door and into the cool, damp morning air, gasping like I'd surfaced from underwater. I didn't slow down. I ran down the crack path, shoved the creaking gate open, and sprinted down the quiet street, not stopping until I reached the busy main road near campus, until the sounds of traffic and normal human voices washed over me, until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I never went back. I abandoned the rest of my stuff, the deposit I never paid, the ridiculously cheap rent. I called my parents, made up a story about a terrible roommate situation, and begged for enough money to get a bus ticket home. I dropped the summer semester, explaining the truth. Impossible. Who would believe a story about a dark web rental, a house governed by terrifying rules, weeping in the attic, and a shuffling, scratching man in the hallway you must never, ever acknowledge? Months later, safely back in my hometown, morbid curiosity got the better of me. I searched the address online. Local news archives mentioned the house sporadically over the years. An elderly man, the owner prior to Abernathy, his father, had vanished without a trace from the property decades ago. More recent articles, just short blurbs, mentioned tenants breaking leases abruptly, citing vague reasons like persistent plumbing issues or structural instability. Nothing about the rules. Nothing about him. The house, according to the latest Street View images, still stood gray and imposing. Maybe Mr. Abernathy found another tenant. Maybe the listing is still buried somewhere in the hidden corners of the web, waiting patiently for the next student desperate enough to ignore the red flags, desperate enough to sign the unwritten lease, desperate enough to learn the rules. I finished my degree online. I sleep with the lights on now, and the sound of shuffling feet or scratching fingernails sends me into a cold sweat. I learned a valuable lesson that some things aren't worth the price. And some doors, especially those found in the dark, should remain unopened. My name is Liam O'Connell. Most people who know me or think they do label me a tech geek. It's not inaccurate, just incomplete. Sure, I build my own rigs, spend hours debugging code, and probably know more about network protocols than is strictly healthy. But it's not just about the clean, logical world of mainstream technology. It's the murky depths, the digital back alleys, the places the average user fears to tread. That's where my real fascination lies. The dark web specifically. Not for the illicit marketplaces, though I've certainly browsed them out of morbid curiosity, but for the sheer, untamed anonymity of it all. It's the last bastion of the truly unknown in our hyper-connected world, a digital Wild West. And like any explorer drawn to uncharted territory, I felt the pull. It started, as these things often do, as a challenge, a dare to myself. Could I navigate the labyrinthine layers of Tor, sift through the scams and the truly disturbing content, and find something mundane, something legitimate, hiding in plain sight amidst the chaos? That's when I stumbled upon the listing. It wasn't on any known marketplace. It was tucked away on a standalone Onion site, linked from some obscure forum discussing experimental uses of decentralized networks. Luxury urban retreat, complete privacy assured. The photos showcased a condo that looked ripped from an architectural magazine. Sleek lines, minimalist furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering what looked like a stunning city view, though the exact location was deliberately obscured. It was aggressively modern, almost sterile, but undeniably high-end. The price, suspiciously low. Like, too good to be true low, especially for the kind of place depicted. There were no reviews, naturally, no host profile picture, just a default gray silhouette. The host went by a simple alphanumeric handle X734. This should have screamed scam or trap. Every rational fiber in my being recognized the absurdity of it. Renting accommodation through an encrypted, anonymous network known for hosting far more sinister enterprises. It was monumentally stupid. And yet the tech geek in me, the part that thrived on pushing boundaries and testing systems, was intrigued. Was it possible? Could someone actually run a legitimate, or semi-legitimate rental business this way, catering to those who valued absolute privacy above all else? Or was it just an elaborate phishing scheme designed to harvest crypto, or worse? My curiosity, that persistent, nagging itch, outweighed my common sense. I had to know. It was, I told myself, just an experiment, a digital field trip. The booking process was as clandestine as expected. Communication was strictly through PGP encrypted messages via a temporary, secure email service linked only through the Onion site. X734's replies were prompt, concise, and devoid of any personality. Just instructions. Payment was demanded up front in Monero, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency notoriously difficult to trace. Again, alarm bells. But I had some Monero lying around from previous digital dabblings, not a huge amount, but enough. I rationalized it as the cost of the experiment. If I lost it, so be it. I sent the payment, my heart thudding slightly as I hit confirm on the transaction. For a few hours, silence. I started to think I'd just thrown crypto into the digital void. Then, a new encrypted message arrived. It simply contained the dates I'd requested, marked as confirmed, and a terse, further instructions 24 hours prior to arrival. No thank you, no looking forward to hosting you. Nothing. The next few weeks were a strange mix of anticipation and low-grade anxiety. I told no one, of course. How could I explain? Yeah, I'm renting a place I found on the dark web from a host I've never seen, communicated with only via encrypted code, and paid using untraceable crypto.
Wish me luck.
They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. 24 hours before my scheduled arrival. The final instructions landed in my secure inbox. They were specific, unsettlingly so. The message contained the full address to high-rise apartment building in a decent, though not quite top-tier, part of the city. Then came the access details. Go to the rear service alleyway. Third drain pipe from the left corner. Count 5 bricks up from the ground. The 5th brick is loose. Behind it, you will find the keycard. Replace the brick carefully. Do not approach the front desk. Do not speak to building staff. Proceed directly to apartment 1408. Use the keycard. Once inside, communicate OLY via this encrypted channel. Under no circumstances attempt to meet the host. Your privacy is paramount, as is ours. Enjoy your stay. Reading it felt like stepping into a spy novel, only without the safety net of fiction. The loose brick, the avoidance of staff, the absolute insistence on anonymity and encrypted communication only, it was bizarre. A part of me was thrilled by the cloak and dagger absurdity of it all. The other part felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just about privacy, it felt like hiding. But from what? Or whom? The taxi dropped me a block away from the address, as requested by another brief addendum message from X734, void direct drop-offs. I walked the rest of the way pulling my roller bag, trying to look casual, like any other resident or visitor. The building itself was modern, glass and steel, fitting the photos, clean, respectable. Nothing overtly sinister about it. I found the service alleyway. It smelled faintly of refuse and damp concrete. Following the instructions felt illicit, my senses hyper-alert. Third drain pipe. Count 5 bricks up. My fingers probed the mortar line. Sure enough, one brick shifted slightly under pressure. It wasn't obviously loose. You'd never notice it unless you knew exactly where to look. My heart hammered against my ribs. Pulling the brick out revealed a small cavity. Inside, nestled on a piece of cloth, was a standard electronic keycard. No notes, no other objects, just the card. I grabbed it, slotted the brick back into place. It clicked satisfyingly snug and walked back towards the main street, trying to quell the adrenaline surge. I bypassed the concierge desk, keeping my head down, focusing on the elevator bank like I knew exactly where I was going. Thankfully, no one paid me any mind. Riding up to the 14th floor, the elevator hummed quietly. The hallway was carpeted, silent. Apartment 1408 was halfway down. My hand trembled slightly as I tapped the keycard. The light flashed green, a soft click echoed in the silence, and the door swung open. I stepped inside and was immediately struck by two things: the overpowering smell of lemon, scented cleaning products, and the profound, unnerving silence. The apartment was exactly as pictured. Polished concrete floors, white walls, minimalist black furniture. Spotless. Clinically so. It didn't feel lived in, it felt staged, like a showroom nobody had ever touched. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a gray, overcast cityscape. I did a quick sweep. Living area with a large flat-screen TV, a sleek, untouched kitchen with high-end appliances. The fridge contained only a single bottle of unopened mineral water. A bedroom with a neatly made bed, crisp white linens, and an en-suite bathroom stocked with generic hotel-sized toiletries. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. There were no personal items anywhere. No books, no photos, no mail, no stray objects. Not even a decorative cushion out of place. It felt less like a home and more like an elaborate empty set. The air was still and cool. I unpacked a few things, placing my laptop on the small desk in the living area, my toiletries in the bathroom. The silence pressed in. I connected to the Wi-Fi. The network name was just a random string of characters. The password provided in the initial instructions. It worked flawlessly. I sent a quick encrypted message to X734, arrived Alec. The reply came back almost instantly. Acknowledged. I tried to settle my nerves. Maybe the host was just extremely fastidious, managing the property remotely through cleaners. Maybe they catered to people who genuinely needed off the grid accommodation for reasons I didn't need to know. Corporate espionage. Witness protection. It was weird, sure, but maybe explainable. I spent an hour browse online, trying to distract myself, but the sterile quiet of the apartment kept pulling my attention. Every creak of the building settling, every distant siren, seemed amplified. I felt exposed, watched, even though I knew I was alone. Or I thought I was. Later that evening, after a quick shower, I went to brush my teeth. The bathroom mirror was still fogged from the steam. As I wiped a clear patch with my hand, my reflection stared back, wide-eyed. because stuck to the glass right at eye level, revealed by my clearing hand, was a small, square piece of paper. A note, in neat, precise block letters. It read, Was OTR press UV and Giro Simfior Fira Oisho Sawars, Ramim Bombito USTBH Matey. My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen it before the shower. It wasn't there. Someone had put it there while I was showering. The precise detail, the hot water. It wasn't a guess, they knew. They were here. Or they could see me. Right now. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against the sudden, suffocating silence of the immaculate, empty apartment. The host wasn't just absent, they were watching. Panic slammed into me like a physical force. My breath hitched, lodging somewhere high in my chest. I ripped the note from the mirror, crumpling the small square of paper in my fist. My eyes darted around the steamy bathroom, the shower curtain, the vanity drawers, the ventilation grate in the ceiling. Nothing. No flicker of movement. No sound beyond my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping in my ears. I burst out of the bathroom, dripping water onto the cold concrete floor. The crumpled note still clutched tight. My apartment keycard, where was it? On the kitchen counter. I snatched it, heart pounding, and fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, twisting it locked. Then the chain. As if those flimsy pieces of metal could stop whatever presence shared the space with me. My mind raced, a chaotic jumble of fear and disbelief, while I was showering. Not before. Not after waiting for me to leave the room. During. That implied an impossible level of stealth, or something else. Something I didn't want to consider. Hidden cameras seemed the obvious, logical explanation. The tech geek in me grasped at that straw. It was invasive, illegal, terrifying. But at least it was explainable within the bounds of technology. I spent the next hour tearing the apartment apart. Not literally, not yet, but my search was frantic, bordering on manic. I checked behind the wall-mounted TV, ran my hands along picture frames. There were none, only blank walls, peered inside light fixtures, opened every kitchen cupboard and drawer, felt under the lip of countertops. I knelt on the floor, examining electrical outlets and smoke detectors. I scanned the seemingly seamless white walls for any pinprick-sized lens. Nothing. The place remained obstinately, perfectly, immaculately empty of anything suspicious, except for the suffocating feeling of being watched. It was as if the apartment itself was the observer, the walls absorbing my movements, the very air transmitting my presence to X734. The search yielded nothing but heightened paranoia. The apartment's minimalist design suddenly seemed less chic, more sinister. Fewer places to hide things. Yes, but also fewer places for me to hide. I felt utterly exposed under the recessed ceiling lights. Defeated, I slumped onto the designer's sofa that felt neither comfortable nor welcoming. The crumpled note was still in my hand. I smoothed it out. Plain cheap paper, like from a notepad. The handwriting was meticulous, almost printed block capitals. No slant, no flourishes. Impossible to gauge gender or personality. Clinical, just like the apartment, just like X734's encrypted messages. I needed answers, needed to confront whatever this was. Booting up my laptop felt like exposing myself further, but the encrypted channel was my only lifeline, my only way to poke the silent watcher. I navigated back to the secure email service, hands shaking slightly as I typed. Found a note in the bathroom. Who put it there? Are you watching me inside the apartment? I demand an explanation. I hit send, the PGP encryption process swirling on screen before confirming transmission. Then I waited. The silence in the apartment pressed down thick and heavy. Every few seconds, my eyes would dart towards the bathroom, the bedroom door, the reflective surface of the dark TV screen. Was someone laughing silently? Watching my mounting fear with cold amusement? The reply came within 10 minutes, chillingly fast. We strive to ensure all amenities meet guest standards throughout their stay. Your comfort and safety are priorities. Please report any specific deficiencies in the facilities, e.g., water pressure, temperature, via this channel for prompt attention. Enjoy the privacy of your urban retreat. My blood ran cold all over again. It was a masterclass in evasion. No denial, no confirmation. Just corporate speak twisted into something deeply unsettling. Ensuring amenities meet guest standards throughout their stay. Your comfort and safety are priorities. It was gaslighting, pure and simple, wrapped in the language of hospitality. They were acknowledging the note's content, the water pressure mention, without acknowledging its terrifying implication. They were telling me they knew, and they weren't going to explain how. The final sentence, "enjoy the privacy," felt like a cruel joke, a deliberate jab. Privacy, I had none. I was a specimen in a meticulously curated terrarium. Sleep was impossible that night. I wedged a chair under the bedroom doorknob, a pathetic gesture that offered zero real security, but provided a sliver of psychological defense. I lay in the crisp, impersonal bed, staring into the darkness, listening for the faintest creak, the softest footfall, the whisper of clothing. The building groaned occasionally. Distant traffic hummed, nothing concrete. But the feeling of being observed never left. It was a palpable presence in the room, prickling the back of my neck. The next day, the notes began to appear more frequently. Each one chipped away at my sanity, reinforcing the invisible cage I was in. I'd spend an hour on my laptop, using a VPN and being careful, researching local laws regarding surveillance, trying to find news articles about missing persons connected to this address, anything. When I got up to get a drink, I returned to find a new note placed squarely on my closed laptop lid.
No.
O kigafar smarsonem so Robbie telhar bista left to unexplored and I owe you monotefidios schzrd or more discurity. They used my name. X734 had never used my name in the encrypted messages. Seeing it written in those cold, block letters felt like a violation, and the content a direct comment on my actions, combined with a veiled threat. Discreet. What did that imply? I barely ate. I'd ordered groceries online the day before, a foolish move, broadcasting my needs. When I opened the fridge to grab the milk, or Janet stuck to the carton. Elch, kunched you shoe ice. Hop, I boss until XNSIV, Rambiar Experaudas Armaral, Asogis Gioli. The casual, almost chatty tone combined with the slightly sinister final word was deeply unnerving. It was like the watcher was trying to mimic friendly advice while reminding me of their constant, intimate scrutiny. They knew what I bought, commented on my choices. Later, I tried calling my sister Sarah. I kept my voice low, pacing the living room, trying to sound normal, giving vague updates. I didn't dare mention the truth. As soon as I hung up, I felt a vibration from my pocket. Not my phone. It was impossible. I reached in and pulled out another folded note. It hadn't been there before the call. Scariest while you sol kel mori oftin. Family say important. Do metien or antisiamadias tichojich. It baldo and el war. Waramas serwa. My stomach churned. They'd heard my call. Heard her name. This wasn't just cameras, it was audio too. And the note appearing in my pocket, how? Had someone brushed past me silently? Was it placed while I was distracted on the phone? The sheer impossibility of it made my head spin. Was I losing my mind? Was this some elaborate high-tech prank? Or was it something far worse? The city view outside the huge windows no longer felt expansive. It felt like staring out from a cage. I considered leaving. Just packing my bag, walking out. Forgetting the Monero, forgetting the experiment. But the notes held me captive as effectively as any lock. We are more discreet than that. Don't mention your accommodations. These weren't just observations, they were instructions, warnings. What happened if I disobeyed? What did X734, this unseen, unknown entity, do to guests who broke the rules? The fear of the unknown, of potential consequences outside these walls, was paralyzing. I felt trapped, not just in the apartment, but in the situation. Going to the police seemed impossible. What would I say? I rented a place on the dark web and the anonymous host is leaving creepy notes. They'd think I was crazy or involved in something illegal myself. And what if X734 had connections, ways of knowing, ways of retaliating? The paranoia fed itself, creating a loop of fear and inaction. On the third day, desperate for some semblance of control, I started tapping walls, searching for hollow sounds, anything out of the ordinary. The apartment remained stubbornly solid, silent. I examined the baseboards, the ceiling panels, the fixtures in the bathroom again. In the bedroom closet, behind a row of empty hangers, I ran my hand along the back wall. It felt smooth, seamless, painted the same stark white as everything else. But near the bottom corner, my fingers brushed against something, a tiny, almost invisible seam. A hairline crack in the paint. My heart rate kicked up. Kneeling down, I pressed gently. There was a faint click, and a small section of the wall, no bigger than a shoebox lid, popped inward slightly. It was a hidden panel, flush-mounted and expertly concealed. My breath caught. What was inside? Evidence. Surveillance equipment. Something worse. With trembling fingers, I pulled the panel open. Inside was a small, dark cavity, and nestled within it, on a bed of dark velvet lining, was not equipment, but a collection of small, disparate objects. A single silver earring, shaped like a feather. A worn, laminated library card issued by a university library in a different state, the photo faded. The name Lianakian barely legible. A child's plastic dinosaur, a cheap, brightly colored stegosaurus scuffed from play. And a tarnished St. Christopher medal on a broken chain. These weren't random items, they felt personal, trophies, mementos, left behind or perhaps taken from previous occupants of this sterile, watchful prison. People who, like me, had been drawn into X-734's web. Anna Chen, the child who loved dinosaurs, the person who sought protection from a saint. Where were they now? Did they enjoy the privacy of their urban retreat and then simply leave? Or did they stay in differently? The curated perfection of the apartment suddenly felt infinitely more menacing. It wasn't just staged, it was scrubbed clean, reset after each gust. The notes weren't just creepy, they were part of a process, a way of monitoring, perhaps controlling. And this hidden box, this was the only trace left of those who came before. The implication hung heavy in the silent air. I was just the latest subject, and my own small memento might one day join the collection in the dark. The fear shifted, becoming something deeper, colder. This wasn't just about being watched. It was about what happened when the watching stopped. Staring into the small, dark cavity at the back of the closet, at the pathetic, intimate relics of lives interrupted, the world tilted. The low-grade hum of paranoia that had become my constant companion crescendoed into a shrieking siren of pure terror. Anna Chen's library card. The child's dinosaur. The feather earring. These weren't just trophies, they were headstones, markers of people who had checked in but, I suspected, never truly checked out. My breath hitched, with hands that felt disconnected from my body. I gently pushed the hidden panel back into place. The faint click echoed in the silence like a finalizing verdict. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the seamless white walls, the impassive furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city utterly indifferent to my plight. The apartment wasn't just watching me, it was digesting me. The paralysis of the past few days shattered, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. I had to get out. Not later, not after weighing the risks, but now. Forget the Monero. Forget the experiment. This was about survival. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But how X-734, whatever it was, seemed omniscient within these walls. Packing a bag would be noticed, a sudden dash for the door. Too obvious. The keycard could be deactivated in an instant. My phone felt compromised, the laptop a direct line to the watcher. I couldn't trust anything electronic. I couldn't trust the silence. I needed chaos. A distraction. Something that would overwhelm the observation, even for a few crucial minutes. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the sleek, minimalist smoke detector high on the ceiling. Fire. It was drastic, potentially dangerous, but the thought ignited a spark of desperate hope. A building-wide alarm might override X-734's localized control. It would bring people, real people, firefighters, maybe even police. An audience, safety in numbers. My plan formed crude and reckless. I went to the kitchen, moving with forced calmness, pretending to make coffee. My hands trembled as I filled the kettle. While the water heated, I grabbed a small stack of paper napkins and stuffed them into the toaster. Then I returned to the kettle, pouring the steaming water into a mug, acting casual. I took a sip, letting the heat scald my tongue, trying to project normalcy into the surveilled space. With the mug still in hand, I walked back towards the toaster, took a deep breath, and pushed the lever down. Sparks flew almost instantly. The napkins ignited, flames licking up towards the underside of the kitchen cabinets. Smoke, acrid and black, began to billow upwards. It was happening faster than I anticipated. My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away, watching the smoke curl towards the ceiling. Any second now, silence, no alarm. The smoke detector remained stubbornly silent, its little green light mocking me. Panic surged anew. Had they anticipated this, disabled it remotely? Was the surveillance so complete they could even control the safety systems? The smoke thickened, stinging my eyes, the smell of burning paper filling the sterile air. This was wrong. It wasn't creating chaos, it was just trapping me in a fire of my own making. Cuffin, I abandoned the fire plan. I needed to leave, alarm or no alarm. I grabbed my wallet and phone, compromised or not. They were all I had in my keycard. Stuffing them into my pockets, I moved towards the front door, trying to project an air of someone annoyed by the smoke, just stepping out for fresh air. Every step felt heavy. Watched. I reached the door, hand hovering over the handle. Would the keycard work? Would the door even open? I took another breath, listening. Only the crackle of the small fire in the toaster and my own ragged breathing. I tapped the keycard against the reader beside the door. The light flashed red. Access denied. A cold dread washed over me. Colder than any fear I'd felt before. They knew. They knew I was trying to leave. I tapped again. Frantically. Red. Trapped. Then, my laptop's screen across the room lit up. A new encrypted message displayed in large font, visible even through the haze of smoke. ATMTM TLEV Liam, Premtir Doppelter Ice Nata Divits, and Arseneses Asorios O Fancy. PLAZX Hashashfar, Mugral di Hashafar Wao Ta Har Bfartia and Ofar Tai. The casual threat, the chillingly bureaucratic tone, it broke something in me. The calculated control, the sheer audacity of it. Rage, hot and sharp, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I wasn't going to be another memento in a hidden box. No, I whispered, then louder, shouting at the empty room. At the invisible watcher. No. I turned away from the locked door and ran towards the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights glittered beyond the glass, a world away. There was no balcony, just a sheer drop. But next to the window, integrated into the frame, was the emergency release lever for cleaning crews. A heavy, red metal handle. If I could break the window, it wouldn't be an escape. Not from the 14th floor, but it would shatter the silence, the control. It would draw attention no amount of encrypted messages could hide. I grabbed the heavy lever. It was stiff. Clearly not meant for easy operation. I threw all my weight into it, grunting with effort. Metal screeched against metal. With a sickening lurch, the mechanism gave way. But the window didn't just crack. An entire pane, a huge sheet of thick glass, disengaged from its frame with a deafening bang, and a rush of wind that sucked the smoke out of the room. The roar of the city filled the apartment, overwhelming the oppressive silence. Alarms immediately started blaring from outside the building, likely triggered by the falling debris or the sudden change in pressure. For a split second, I just stood there, wind whipping my hair, the city noise a glorious chaos. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a call, not a text. I pulled it out. Another encrypted message from X734. I'm Pressav, F ko terchibrada sitar for Ives Istoraue, like you hars harsit. Th cars briusum to Ice altered experiment. My blood ran cold. What experiment? Suddenly the lights in the apartment flickered violently. Then died, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the ambient city glow through the gaping hole where the window had been and the dying flames in the toaster. The building's emergency lights flickered on in the hallway outside. I could see them under the door, but not in here. Then I heard it. A low, electronic hum emanating from the walls themselves. A section of the wall near the kitchen shimmered, distorting like heat haze, before becoming translucent. It wasn't paint, it was some kind of display surface, seamlessly integrated. And behind it, I saw not wires or cameras in the conventional sense, but a complex, shifting lattice of light, nodes pulsing softly within the structure of the building itself. It was the walls. The entire apartment was the observation device. And from the hallway I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching my door. Not the police, not firefighters. Too soon. This was something else. Terror gave me one last burst of adrenaline. I scrambled towards the gaping hole in the window frame. Below, sirens wailed, growing closer. People were pointing up. Maybe, just maybe, the footsteps stopped outside my door. I heard the distinct sound of a keycard, a different kind, a master override, beep green. The deadbolt clicked open. I didn't wait. I climbed onto the window ledge, heart pounding against my ribs, the wind threatening to tear me away. I looked down at the street, distant and terrifying, then back at the door as it began to swing inward. I couldn't see who or what was entering. I didn't want to know. I jumped, not down, outward. Towards the adjacent window washing platform, retracted against the building a few feet away. It was a suicidal leap, fueled by sheer panic. My fingers scrabbled, catching the metal grating of the platform floor. Pain shot up my arms as my body slammed against the side. for a terrifying moment. I dangled, wind roaring around me, the sounds from the apartment, the humming, the opening door echoing in my ears. With a surge of desperate strength, I hauled myself onto the platform, collapsing onto the cold metal, gasping for air, shards of glass raining down from above. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the approaching sirens. No one came out onto the platform. No messages appeared. Eventually, firefighters rappelled down from the roof, their faces masks of confusion and concern as they secured me and lowered me to the ground. I told the police a garbled story, a faulty wire, a sudden fire, panic, breaking the window, climbing out. I didn't mention the dark web, the encrypted messages, the notes, the hidden box, 6734. They wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was high delusional, or responsible for something far worse. They tested the apartment's smoke detector. It was functional. They found no trace of advanced surveillance, only my laptop and phone, wiped clean remotely. The hidden panel was flush, invisible once more. The apartment was just an apartment again, albeit one with fire damage and a missing window. I left the city the next day, changed my number, scrubbed my online presence as best I could. But I know it's not over. I know X734, whatever it is still out there. The experiment might be concluded for me, but the program continues. Sometimes late at night I receive emails, not encrypted anymore, just plain text from anonymous, untraceable addresses. They look like spam feedback requests from services I've never used. How would you rate your recent stay? Did our facilities meet your expectations? Your privacy is important to us. Click here to manage your preferences. I delete them immediately. But the message is clear. They're still watching. They know where I am. They remember Liam O'Connell. And they want me to know that checking out of their system isn't as simple as jumping out of a window. You never truly leave. You just become another data point, another potential memento, waiting for the next experiment to begin. Beware the places that promise perfect privacy. Sometimes the walls really do have eyes, and they never blink. My name is Isabel Rossi, though these days I barely recognize the woman staring back at me from dusty mirrors or darkened phone screens. It's been 6 weeks since the implosion. Not a quiet fizzle. Not a gentle drifting apart, but a full-scale, messy, public detonation of what I thought was my life. Liam, my fiancé, ex-fiancé now. A title that still tastes like ash in my mouth, hadn't just cheated. He'd orchestrated a campaign of gaslighting and manipulation that culminated in a spectacular scene at, of all places, my own sister's engagement party. The fallout was radioactive. Whispers followed me, pitying glances felt like physical blows, and the digital tendrils of social media ensured there was no corner of my world left untouched by the humiliation. I felt flayed open, exposed, and utterly, desperately raw. Sleep offered no respite, just replays of arguments and the sickening smirk on his face. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a glass cage. I needed to disappear. Not just take a vacation, but vanish off the face of the known earth, at least for a while. That's when the idea, seeded by a hushed, almost conspiratorial comment from a friend's vaguely shady cousin, took root. If you really want off the grid, like really off, he'd muttered over cheap beer, eyes darting around the noisy bar, there are other options. Not your usual booking sites. He mentioned the dark web. The phrase itself sent a shiver down my spine, conjuring images of illicit marketplaces and shadowy figures. It felt dangerous, excessive. But the thought of absolute privacy, the core promise he hinted at, lodged itself in my brain like a burr. Normal channels felt compromised. Liam had an uncanny knack for finding me, for inserting himself back into my orbit just when I thought I was safe. Maybe excessive was exactly what I needed. It took me 3 days of wrestling with my paranoia and desperation, fueled by caffeine and sleepless nights, before I downloaded the specialized browser and followed the cryptic instructions the cousin had reluctantly provided. The site itself was unsettlingly minimalist, stark white text on a black background. No images. Just lists of properties under headings like total seclusion, untraceable stays, and digital detox zones. The descriptions were brief, clinical, focusing on features like Faraday cage construction, scrambler-equipped landlines, seer if any, and a creege ensuring no neighbors within miles. Payment was strictly cryptocurrency, untraceable and final. It felt less like booking a vacation rental and more like arranging a safe house. After scrolling through listings that range from bleak concrete bunkers to isolated mountain cabins that looked suspiciously like survivalist compounds, I found it. The Meadowbrook Cottage. The description was marginally warmer than the others. Charming, restored 19th century workers' cottage nestled in 50 private acres of woodland. Absolute peace guaranteed. No cellular service. Satellite internet available, restricted use. Nearest neighbor 7 miles. Basement access strictly prohibited. Even the prohibition felt quaint compared to warnings about reinforced steel doors on other listings. There was a single, slightly blurry photo, a small stone cottage with a steeply pitched roof, ivy climbing one wall, surrounded by dense, almost suffocatingly green trees. It looked impossibly idyllic, like something from a forgotten fairy tale. Compared to the sterile paranoia of the other options, it felt almost normal. The price was steep, payable in Monero, but my desperation had overridden my financial caution weeks ago. I clicked reserve, transferred the funds into the digital void, and received an encrypted message almost instantly. The message contained coordinates, a complex sequence for a lockbox hidden near the property gate, and a single, stark reminder: the basement remains sealed for owner's storage. Do not attempt entry. Your privacy is contingent on respecting property boundaries. The host signed off only as caretaker. No name, no number, just a digital ghost. The journey itself was part of the disappearing act. I drove for 8 hours, pushing my old sedan further and further away from civilization. Paved roads turned to gravel, gravel turned to dirt tracks barely wider than my car. My phone signal died 3 hours in, plunging me into an unnerving digital silence. Following the coordinates loaded onto an offline map app felt like navigating by treasure map. Finally, deep in a forest that seemed to swallow sound, I found the rusted gate mentioned in the instructions. The lockbox was there, hidden beneath a specific moss-covered rock. Inside, a single heavy, old-fashioned iron key. The cottage, when I finally reached it at the end of a winding, overgrown lane, was both exactly like the photo and subtly wrong. The charm was there, the weathered stone, the ivy, the quaint wooden shutters. But the silence was heavier than I expected, pressing in on my ears. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and sweet, like old rust and decaying leaves. The surrounding woods felt less like a tranquil backdrop and more like a watchful entity, the trees crowding close, their branches like skeletal fingers. Inside, it was clean, meticulously so. Polished wooden floors, simple, sturdy furniture that looked like it had been there for decades, a small functional kitchen, and a cozy living area with a stone fireplace. It was clear someone maintained the place, but there was an impersonal, almost sterile feel beneath the rustic charm. No photos, no knickknacks, no sign that anyone truly lived here. It felt staged, like a museum exhibit of a cozy life. Upstairs, a single bedroom with a comfortable-looking bed and a small bathroom completed the picture. Everything I needed, nothing I didn't. Except for one thing. In the short hallway connecting the kitchen to the living room, set into the floor, was the basement door. It wasn't just locked, it looked sealed. Heavy, dark wood, banded with what looked like tarnished brass or copper. An old, oversized padlock, the kind you see on ancient chests, secured a thick hasp. Scratches marred the wood near the bottom. Deep gouges that looked strangely deliberate. Seeing it, feeling the palpable "don't you dare" vibe radiating from it, solidified the host's warning in my mind. It wasn't just owner's storage. It felt like a containment measure. I made a conscious effort to ignore it, telling myself it was just an old house with quirks. The first night was deeply, profoundly quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. I slept fitfully, the silence somehow louder than the city noise I was used to, my dreams filled with indistinct shadows and the lingering image of Liam's face. I woke feeling unrested but strangely determined. This was my sanctuary, my escape. I would make it work. I spent the day unpacking the few things I'd brought, tidying the already tidy space, trying to imprint some sense of myself onto the anonymous cottage. I tried the satellite internet. It was slow, barely usable for basic email, just as advertised. No chance of accidentally stumbling onto social media or news sites. True isolation. As dusk began to bleed through the trees, painting the small living room in shades of gray and deep purple, I settled onto the sofa with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The silence was still immense, but I was starting to adjust. Then I heard it, scritch, scritch, scrape. It was faint at first, easily dismissed. An animal outside, a branch brushing against the stone. I held my breath, listening. Scritch, scrape, scritch, scritch, scarp. It was louder this time, clearer. And it wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside the cottage. From below, my blood ran cold. The sound was rhythmic. Insistent, like fingernails dragging slowly, deliberately across rough wood. It seemed to be emanating directly from the floor, from the direction of the heavy, locked basement door. I froze. Book forgotten in my lap, every nerve ending alight. The scratching continued, a dry, rasping sound that scraped not just against wood, but against the fragile piece I had so desperately sought. It went on for perhaps a minute, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the oppressive silence crashing back in, now laced with a chilling, undeniable dread. The basement wasn't just for storage. Something was down there, and it sounded like it wanted to get out. The silence that rushed back in after the scratching stopped was worse than the noise itself. It felt heavy, thick with implication. I remained frozen on the sofa, muscles locked, ears straining against the sudden quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was it gone? Was it waiting? My mind scrambled for explanations. A raccoon trapped under the house, maybe. Tree roots shifting. An old house settling. But the sound had been too specific, too located, too deliberate. Fingernails on wood. That image wouldn't leave my mind. It came from under the basement door. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the sofa. A heavy fireplace poker clutched in my white, knuckled grip, jumping at every creak and groan of the ancient cottage. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window panes, making the shadows thrown by the sparse moonlight dance like specters. Every mundane sound became magnified, sinister. Was that a footstep on the porch? Was the scratching starting again, softer this time? I couldn't be sure. My imagination, fueled by fear and isolation, was running wild. Or perhaps it wasn't my imagination at all. The utter lack of contact with the outside world pressed in on me. No signal bars, no weak light blinking reassuringly. Just me, the woods, and the locked door. The absolute privacy I'd craved now felt like a cage. When the first, weak gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, it brought only a marginal sense of relief. Fear, I realized, doesn't always vanish with the dark. Sometimes, it just changes shape. The sharp terror of the night solidified into a cold, gnawing anxiety. I had to know more. Ignoring it wasn't an option. The sound had burrowed under my skin. After forcing down some coffee that tasted like cardboard, I approached the basement door. In the flat morning light, it looked even more forbidding. The dark wood was thick, solid oak perhaps, scarred and weathered. The brassy metal bands across it were dull, tarnished with age and neglect. The padlock was enormous, its iron surface pitted with rust, yet it looked utterly secure. I knelt, examining the scratches near the bottom. Some were clearly old, faded and smooth-edged, but others looked newer, sharper. Splinters of wood pale against the darker stain. Clung to the edges of some gouges. It looked exactly like someone or something had been clawing at it. Recently, I pressed my ear against the cool wood. Silence. Not even the hum of insects or the distant wind seemed to penetrate it. I tapped lightly. The wood felt incredibly dense, solid. I tried the handle, confirming it was securely locked, rattling against the heavy hasp. Then, I noticed the smell again, the faint, sickly sweet metallic tang, mixed with damp earth and mildew. It was definitely stronger here, seeping up from the almost invisible gap between the bottom of the door and the floorboards. It smelled like decay. My next step was a circuit around the cottage's exterior. I scanned the stone foundation line, pushing aside overgrown bushes and weeds. Nothing. No vents, no windows, not even a disused coal chute. The foundation was solid, impenetrable stone, meeting the earth seamlessly. If there was a way into the basement other than that door, it wasn't visible from the outside. The cottage sat squat and heavy on the earth, guarding its secrets. Frustration and fear warred within me. I went back inside, pacing the small rooms. My eyes scanned every surface, every corner, searching for, I didn't even know what, a hidden message. A previous tenant's warning. A tool that might offer a clue or worse, a way in. There was nothing. The cottage remained impersonally tidy, offering no hints, no history beyond its aged timbers. It felt like a deliberate blank slate. Remembering the satellite internet, I powered up my laptop, the slow boot-up sequence grating on my already frayed nerves. The connection was, as before, painfully slow, but I had to try. I composed a message through the encrypted portal I'd used to receive the key instructions. It took me 20 minutes to phrase it carefully, trying to sound calm and rational, not like a woman unraveling miles from anywhere. To caretaker, I typed, fingers trembling slightly. Reporting unusual noises last night, consistent with animal activity. Seemingly localized near basement entryway. Request confirmation that basement structure is secure and access restriction remains absolute. Please advise if any pest control measures are warranted or previously undertaken. Isabel Rossi. I hit send. The message vanished into the ether. No confirmation received. No indication it had been received, let alone read. Just the blank screen and the thrumming silence of the cottage. Had the caretaker even received it? Would they respond? Or was the silence the answer? The dark web rental suddenly felt infinitely more sinister. This wasn't like complaining to AirBNB support. There was no support. There was just the anonymous caretaker, the untraceable transaction, and the locked door. The rules felt absolute, and the consequences for breaking them terrifyingly vague. Violation voids agreement and guarantees forfeiture of deposit and privacy. What did losing privacy mean out here, arranged through such clandestine means? Did it mean they simply abandoned me? Or did it mean something worse? Did it mean exposure? As the day wore on, the tension mounted. I tried reading, but the words swam before my eyes. I tried tidying, but there was nothing out of place. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I found myself staring at the basement door, drawn to it and repulsed by it in equal measure. The silence from below was almost worse than the scratching. It felt like something was holding its breath, listening, waiting. Late afternoon brought a change. A subtle drop in temperature. Noticeable only because the rest of the cottage was warmed by the pale sunlight. But near the basement door, the air grew cold. Not just cool, but unnaturally chilly. A pocket of near-freezing air that raised goosebumps on my arms. I backed away, rubbing my skin, disturbed. Then, as dusk began to settle again, the sounds returned. Thump, soft but definite. A dull impact against the underside of the door. I froze mid-step in the kitchen. Thump, thump. It was heavier this time. Less like scratching, more like something solid bumping against the wood. My breath hitched. I strained to listen. Screech UMP. The familiar rasp of scratching, frantic now, followed immediately by a heavy thud that seemed to make the floorboards under my feet vibrate almost imperceptibly. It wasn't an animal. Animals didn't methodically thump. My carefully constructed rationalizations crumbled into dust. And then something new, a low sound, barely audible beneath the thumping and scratching. A guttural moan, a drawn-out sigh. It was indistinct, distorted by the thick wood, but undeniably vocal. It sounded like pain, or perhaps like effort. The effort of trying to get through. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I backed away from the door, stumbling over a rug, heart pounding erratically. The poker felt useless, absurd against whatever was down there. My gaze was locked on the door, on the heavy padlock, on the scratches illuminated by the deepening twilight. The urge to flee, to run out of the cottage and into the woods, was overwhelming. But where would I go? Miles from anywhere, no signal. Darkness falling. The thumping intensified, becoming a desperate rhythmic banging against the wood, hard and heavy. Whatever was down there was no longer just scratching. It was trying to break the door down. And mingling with the heavy impacts, clearer now, was that sound, a low, ragged, inhuman groan that seemed to claw its way up from unimaginable depths. The idyllic cottage had become a trap, and the silence I'd sought was filled with the echoes of something waking up in the darkness beneath my feet. The caretaker's warning wasn't just about storage. It was about containment, and I was locked inside with it.
Bing. Bing.
The rhythmic assault on the basement door had become deafening in the small cottage. Each impact vibrated through the floorboards, jarring my teeth. The wood around the heavy hasp was splintering, pale wounds stark against the dark stain. The padlock, thick as it was, shrieked with the strain, pulled taut against buckling metal. Mixed with the relentless pounding was that awful, ragged groaning, rising in pitch and volume, twisting into something that sounded horribly like rage. Panic clawed its way up my throat, hot and acidic. This wasn't just noise anymore, it was imminent violence. The barrier wouldn't hold. My frantic eyes darted around the living room. Barricade. I needed to barricade it. Adrenaline surged, overriding the paralysis of fear. I lunged at the heaviest piece of furniture, a stout wooden armchair upholstered in faded floral fabric. Grunting with effort, I shoved it across the floor, wedging its back against the shuddering basement door. It wasn't much, but it was something. I added a small, sturdy side table, piling it against the chair. It was useless. The next bang slammed into the door with renewed force, sending the armchair skittering back several inches with a screech of wood on wood. Splinters flew into the air. A visible crack snaked its way down the center panel of the door. The groaning intensified, morphing into a high-pitched, ragged shriek that pierced through the noise of the impacts, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and fury that scraped against my sanity. That scream broke something inside me. The last vestiges of hope that this was somehow explainable, survivable within these four walls, evaporated. This cottage wasn't a sanctuary, it was a holding cell, and the prisoner was breaking free. I wasn't safe in here, I was trapped with it. My only chance was outside. The dark woods. The miles of isolation, the uncertainty, they were terrifying, but they were better than waiting for that door to give way completely. My movements became frantic, driven by raw survival instinct. Keys. Wallet. Phone useless, but a talisman of the world I desperately needed to reach. I snatched them from the kitchen counter. The fireplace poker lay discarded on the floor. I didn't even glance at it. What good would it be? My hands trembled violently as I fumbled with the bolts on the cottage's front door. Each second felt stretched thin, distorted by the cacophony behind me, the splintering wood, the shrieking metal, the horrific, inhuman cries. With a final, wrenching sarasque that echoed like a gunshot, the basement door burst inwards. I risked a glance back as I yanked the front door open. The barricade lay scattered, the armchair overturned. The basement door hung partially off its hinges, revealing not darkness, but a deeper, more profound blackness within the opening. A wave of freezing air billowed out, carrying an overwhelming stench, the metallic sweetness now thick and cloying, mingled with the gag-inducing odors of ammonia, rot, and something indescribably foul, like long stagnant water and butcher shop waste. And in that blast of frigid, faded air I saw it, or rather a horrifying impression of it. A flash of something bone, white, skeletal, thin, unfolding itself from the oppressive blackness below. It moved with an unnatural, jerky speed, limbs bending at too many joints. I caught a glimpse of a long, pale hand or claw, scrabbling for purchase on the doorframe, fingers impossibly long and tipped with darkness. There was a wet, clicking sound, like insects chittering or bones scraping together. No face, no eyes in the brief, terrifying glimpse, just a shape of pure wrongness scrambling into the hallway. I didn't wait to see more. I threw myself out the front door and into the oppressive darkness of the night. I ran blindly, stumbling down the overgrown lane, branches whipping at my face and arms, tearing at my clothes. The only light was the sliver of moon occasionally visible through the dense canopy, casting confusing, dancing shadows that looked like grasping limbs. Behind me, I thought I heard it, a drawn-out, gurgling shriek echoing from the cottage, followed by a heavy thud on the porch. Was it following? Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like pursuit. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest, but the terror propelled me forward. The image of that pale jointed thing, the stench, the sounds, they were burned into my mind, fueling a panic so profound it bordered on madness. I sobbed without realizing it, tears streaming down my face, mixing with sweat and dirt. The woods felt alive, hostile, the trees closing in, the darkness absolute between patches of moonlight. I tripped over roots, scrambled back to my feet, pushed onwards with no sense of direction other than away. How long I ran, I don't know. It felt like hours. My legs were rubber, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just as I felt I couldn't take another step, that I would collapse here in the suffocating darkness, I saw at the faint reflective gleam of my car, parked near the rusted gate where this nightmare had begun. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. I fumbled with the keys, my shaking hands making the simple act of unlocking the door an agonizing struggle. Finally, I was inside, slamming the door shut, locking it, heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, died. Panic flared again. No, 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 please, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I tried again. It caught, roared to life, the headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the empty track before me. I slammed the car into reverse, spun around with squealing tires, and floored the accelerator, bumping violently over the rutted track, not daring to look in the rearview mirror, until I hit the slightly smoother gravel road. Then finally, miraculously, pavement. I drove for hours, pushing far beyond the speed limit, needing the lights, the signs of civilization, the sheer distance. I finally pulled over at a brightly lit 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent glare feeling alien and abrasive after the profound darkness. I sat there for a long time, shaken uncontrollably, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back was wild-eyed, streaked with dirt and tears, her hair matted with leaves. Isabel Rossi. I didn't know her anymore. I never reported it. Who would I tell? The police. Yes, officer. I rented a cottage on the dark web, and there was something monstrous locked in the basement. They'd lock me up for psychiatric evaluation, or worse, suspect me of something. I drove straight back to my old apartment, the one that had felt like a glass cage. Now its familiar locks and solid walls felt like the strongest fortress imaginable. I deleted the specialized browser, wiped any trace of the transaction, burned the piece of paper with the caretaker's cryptic instructions. I tried to scrub the memory clean, but it was impossible. The scratching sounds echoed in my quiet moments. The cloying stench sometimes seemed to linger faintly in the air for no reason. Sleep brought nightmares filled with splintering wood, impossible angles, and bone-white limbs unfolding from darkness. Weeks later, something arrived, not in the mail but digitally. An anonymous transfer of cryptocurrency appeared in the temporary wallet I'd used for the rental payment, a significant amount, far exceeding the original deposit. There was no message, just a transaction note, cold and clinical, for services rendered in discretion. Services rendered. Discretion. Did the caretaker know I'd fled? Had they expected it? Was my terror, my flight, part of some incomprehensible purpose? Did they know the thing had gotten out? Or was it simply payment for my silence, for respecting the property boundaries until I couldn't anymore? The question swirled, unanswered, adding another layer of chilling ambiguity to the horror. The absolute privacy I paid for wasn't mine. It belonged to the secret in the basement. And now, that secret was out. Or perhaps, it had merely been relocated. The money felt dirty, tainted, a stain I couldn't wash away. Just like the memory of the cottage, the locked door, and the unimaginable thing that waited in the basement beneath. My escape wasn't an ending. It felt like a loose thread in a much larger, darker tapestry I could never hope to comprehend. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still wonder if something followed me out of those woods,